Buongiorno, good morning everybody, thank you for being here. It's very bad weather, so we have a speaker who's on her way. She also was a little sick, we hope she can make it, and I'm sure she will. And we also have a couple of students who emailed us telling us that we're going to be late. This is our first edition of this EU workshop. The idea came because I wanted to be sure that students here in Florence for 3 months before leaving the city of Florence had a good idea of the current public debates on Europe, by Europe, in Europe. And I thought, not everybody's taking the econ class, or not everybody will be taking a poli-sci class in any other order. So I thought we'd better do something that will help students come to grapple with these great overarching issues with which Europe is dealing as we speak. Now, this is the first edition of this workshop, so you'll have to let me know how useful you think it was, or it will be, and whether or not you think we should do it again every quarter. My inclination is to host a similar workshop every quarter, but I'll hear back from you about it. We have quite a few speakers, so I will not say anything myself. I will just introduce the speakers who are here, and then I will turn it over to them. There will be a coffee break at some point in the morning, and there will be a light lunch served at the end of the workshop. Now, I look forward very much to regrouping all of us here this afternoon at 5:30, when Professor Jonathan Berger will give his talk, which will be one of our public lectures, one of our incontri a Palazzo afternoon sessions. So thank you all to the speakers for having accepted our invitation to come talk about Europe with our students. Europe is not always on the radar when you're on the other side of the ocean, and especially here in California. But in general, I was just there now, and in preparation of the workshop, I was trying to look for articles on the New York Times that dealt with Europe, and I couldn't find too many. Some, but not too many. In any case, I'm very pleased to be here with all of you, and thank you again for having accepted our invitation. I'd like to start with one introduction. Professor Elena Baracani. Elena Baracani is Assistant Professor of Political Science at the University of Bologna in the Department of Political and Social Sciences, where she currently teaches a comparative politics class. She's also a lecturer and the scientific secretary of the PhD program in political science at the Istituto Italiano di Scienze Umane in Florence. Scientific secretary is not a secretarial position. In Italian we call segretario scientifico, and it means that you're there organizing, you're the mind behind the curriculum, for example, and a number of other activities. She received her PhD in political science from the University of Florence in 2006, and in 2008, she won a postdoc research grant to the prestigious European Foreign and Security Policy Studies program funded by the Compagnia di San Paolo. She was the deputy director of the Italian Research Center for European Studies at the University of Florence, and she has taught BA, MA, and PhD courses in political science at both Italian University, University of Florence, University of Perugia, Istituto Italiano di Scienze Umane, and Lewis in Rome, and also at American universities. She's taught at Rutgers University, Kent State University, California State University, but she also teaches a class for us in the spring quarter on political science, the EU from a political perspective. She's the author of a monograph on the EU and democratization in Turkey, which came out in 2008, and of a forthcoming volume on the EU and the prevention of ethno-political conflicts. She's also edited a collection of scholarly works entitled Democratization and Hybrid Regimes, External Anchoring and Domestic Dynamics in European Post-Soviet Countries. This came out in 2010. In any case, she's widely published, very well known and very well informed on things European. One of her mentors, Professor Leonardo Morlino, who used to teach for us for a very long time, also taught on campus and is friends with the group doing democracy issues on campus, Larry Diamond and Mike McFall and all of these people at FSI. Why don't I turn it over to you, Elena, and then I will introduce each speaker as your time comes.
Okay.
So welcome and thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be here. It's always a pleasure and an honor, and also thank you for this very long introduction that I didn't expect. So I'm very glad to be here to talk with you of the European Union, and even if I have to say that the task that I was assigned is not an easy one, because I will try to give you basic information on the European Union, you see the process of European integration, and key actors in 25 minutes, which is usually something that I do in the course of 30 hours. So I really had to select most important information for you, and I hope I managed to do the right choice. Okay. So, the process of European integration, turning points and key actors. I want to underline from the beginning that the process of European integration, with this question, that is, what is the process of European integration? This is a process of integration of a macro-geographic region, Europe, but what type of integration it is? It is mainly an economic integration. You will see from, I will show you in the next slide, that turning points that I have selected in this process deal with economic integration. This means that we don't have yet a fully fledged European state. Okay, so we don't have yet reached a higher level of political integration. This is also linked to what is the nature of the European Union, what sort of political actor is the European Union. What is usually said is that it has an hybrid nature, it's a mixture of a regional organization, so intergovernmental organization if you want, and a state. Because, as you probably know, it has some features that usually only states have. I'm thinking, for example, to the common currency. But on the other hand, we don't have a real European government, even if there is, of course, a European governance. And this is how I have organized the presentation. Deepening, widening, and EU institutions. Why deepening and widening? And what is the meaning of these two terms? What political scientists usually do to reconstruct the process of European integration is to use these two dynamics of deepening and widening, and to indicate for each of these dynamics key turning points. So I think that widening, it's clear what it refers to. It refers to the different enlargement rounds which have characterized the process of European integration. You know that at the beginning they were 6 founding or original members, and now they have become 28. So this is widening. While with deepening, we refer to a very interesting phenomenon, that is the fact that political power is moving from the level of the European nation state to the supranational level of the European Union, which means, you will see, that in an increasing number of policy areas, it is no more the national government to take decisions for their citizens, but EU institutions. And this is a very important phenomenon. Then, these are the turning points that I have selected for deepening. You see that the process of European integration started in 1951, when the Treaty of Paris was signed, which established the first European community, the European coal and steel community. What is important to underline is how this process of European integration started, what sort of community was this. You see that the focus of this community was on coal and steel. So the idea of the original, of the founding members, was to start their cooperation in a very specific economic sector. That was, of course, of fundamental importance in those years, for example, for military industries. So the idea was, let's create a common market for these resources, and decisions on the production of coal and steel will be taken by a common institution called High Authority on behalf of the member states of this community. So you see how power is delegated to a supranational level in a very, very specific economic sector. Then this process goes on with another treaty. There are two treaties, the treaties of Rome of 57, that create two additional communities, the European Economic Community and Euratom. Of fundamental interest in this process of economic integration is the EEC, European Economic Community, because the purpose of this community is the establishment of a customs union. Customs union means, free movement of goods without borders among the members of this community. And then, in the case of the EEC, there was also a common external tariff. So you see how it works. First, common market for coal and steel. Then, customs union for industrial goods. And then, the next step in this process is the signing of the Single European Act in 86. It is called Act, but it is exactly another treaty. And the most important aspect of this treaty is the establishment of a deadline, 1992, within which all the existing barriers, tariff and non-tariff barriers to the free of movement for goods, persons, capital and services have to be removed. This means that this treaty, the Single European Act, establishes a deadline within which the single market has to be completed. Single market means free movement not only for goods, but also for persons, capital and services. So you see that we started from common market for coal and steel, then customs union for industrial goods, and then this single market. Then we are in 92, and in Maastricht it is signed the Treaty on the European Union. So the first thing you have to know on this treaty is that it creates the European Union. This means that before we didn't have the European Union. What we had were the three communities: European Coal and Steel Community, European Economic Community, and Euratom. So the Treaty of Maastricht creates the European Union, then it introduces an additional and very important policy area, which is economic and monetary union, which is the policy of the euro. Okay, it is because of this treaty that now we have a European Central Bank that is responsible for our monetary policy. So you see that the next step after the common market is what? A common currency. And then it is important to underline that the Treaty of Maastricht contains also provisions on additional policy areas, as common foreign security policy, that is our common European foreign policy, and also on justice and home affairs. Then you have the Treaty of Amsterdam. The Treaty of Amsterdam was the treaty that was expected to do the reforms of the institutions in view of the enlargement to Eastern European countries. issues. But this treaty failed to do this, and the treaty that did this was the Nice Treaty, and it reformed institutions, EU institutions, in view of the enlargement to Eastern European countries. Then you see that in 2004 an important treaty was signed. It was called Constitutional Treaty, so it gives you the idea, I think also from the name, that they tried to make this, to give this economic integration also more political aspects. The idea of a constitution. It was not really a constitution because it was another international treaty, but the structure of this treaty was similar to a constitution. Different actors were involved in the process of drafting this document. Then the Constitutional Treaty tried to address the problem of the democratic deficit of the European Union, strengthening the powers of the European Parliament. So you see that it was a treaty that also tried to take care of more political issues. But this treaty didn't enter into force because in 2005 it was not ratified in France and in the Netherlands. And then we arrived to the Lisbon Treaty, signed in 2007, entered into force in 2009, and this is the last revision of the treaties that we have. And there's a lot of continuity between the Constitutional Treaty and the Lisbon Treaty. So, for example, this treaty has also tried to address the problem of the democratic deficit of the European Union, as well as trying to make EU foreign policy be more coherent, these type of things that if you want in the debate I can come back to these issues. Then, this on widening. As I was mentioning at the beginning, widening refers to the different enlargement rounds. So I think this table should give you an overview of what's happening. If you can't see, I don't know. So you see that at the beginning, the original founding members were 6. Then there was a first enlargement in 1973 to northern countries, but a very important European state, nation state joined the communities, the UK. Then you see that there was another enlargement in the 80s. It is referred to as a single enlargement round, Mediterranean enlargement, which involved Greece, Spain, and Portugal. It's very interesting because you see that as soon as these countries had a transition to democracy, they applied to become members of the European Union community, because the idea for these countries was that being anchored to the European economic community could favor their process of democratic consolidation. And then you will see that the same things has happened in the case of Central and Eastern European countries. Then, Northern enlargement, 95, and then 2004, the so-called Big Bang enlargement, because you see that at the same time, 10 new countries, 10 new members joined the European Union. 8 Central Eastern European countries and 2 small Mediterranean islands. And this is the reason why EU institutions have to be reformed, because of this big enlargement, because you can imagine that it is not the same for EU institutions to work when you have 15 members and to continue work efficiently when you have a group of 25 members. Think, for example, to decisions that have to be taken with unanimity. This is a problem. Then 2007 is considered as a follow-up of the enlargement of 2004, and then the last one with Croatia. And now we have 28 members. Then, what I think could be useful in this general framework on the European Union is to give you an idea of future enlargements. And well, this means that in the future, the number of the members of the European Union will increase. What is expected is that these countries that have the official status of accession candidate countries or potential candidate countries will join the European Union. Okay, so these countries know that their future should be in the European Union. While on the other hand, you have the so-called European Neighbourhood Policy partners. These partners are the southern and eastern neighbors of the enlarged European Union. So you see that you have Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus, but also Southern Caucasus countries, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Northern Africa and Middle East countries. These are the neighbors, and the European Neighbourhood Policy is the external policy that has been designed by the European Union in 2004 to handle relations with the neighbors. What do you think? Why was important to handle relations with the neighbors? Because you have to know that these neighbors are of fundamental importance for the stability and security of the European Union. Because the stability and the security of the European Union is dependent on its external stability, which means on domestic dynamics in these countries. And the key difference between these two categories of countries, accession candidate countries and potential candidate countries on the one hand, and partners of the ENP on the other hand, is that ENP partners won't join the European Union. Okay? So they know that they don't have this membership perspective. Then, one more thing on accession candidate countries and potential candidate countries. Because I told you that the future of these countries is in the European Union. But there are some problems, at least for two countries. One is Turkey, because you know that there is a big hostility, opposition by member states and citizens towards this future enlargement. And another problematic country is Kosovo, because Kosovo is not recognized by all the member states of the European Union. So how can you offer a membership perspective to a country that you are not recognizing as a country? You see that this is also the European Union. But again, if you want, we can further discuss these issues in the debate. Then, next question. Because now you have seen how the process of European Union has evolved. But then the next question is, what is the European Union doing? And the answer that I prefer is this one, that what the European Union is doing is that it is regulating. So it is producing regulations, rules, norms in order to do what? To regulate the single market, the four freedoms we were mentioning before, and then also EMU, Economic and Monetary Union, to regulate EMU, which complements the single market. So it's producing a lot of laws, and an indicator of this is also the fact that from the point of view of EU citizens, you have to know that 2/3 of the laws that govern our daily life come from Brussels and not from the nation states. And then a further indicator of this is data on the spending power of the European Union, because you see here that the spending power of the European Union is only 1% of the total GDP of the member states. So as you can see, the European Union doesn't have many economic resources to redistribute among its members. And to understand what the European Union is doing, it's very useful to give a look at the budget. You see very briefly that, first of all, it's 1% of, in this case, GNI, but I would like to underline how it is allocated, this very reduced budget. You see that the two largest percentage of this budget are used for what? Common agriculture policy and for cohesion or regional policies. So to give money to those countries that have underdeveloped regions. And common agriculture policy means to give subsidies to farmers. Then give a look at the percentage that is used by the European Union for its foreign policy. It's 6%. Then you see that, I think that you understand also from this data that when the European Union, you hear saying that the European Union is not a huge global player, it is also because of this. Okay, then I'm moving to the second part that is on the institutions, key actors. What is important to know on the institutions of the European Union is that these institutions are representing different interests. Different interests that are very often in opposition. Because on the one hand, you have the general interest, the interest of all EU citizens, that should be promoted by institutions like the European Parliament and the European Commission. And on the other hand, you have the specific national interest of each member state. So these are two dynamics in terms of interest that very often are in opposition, which means that they don't want the same outcomes in terms of the process of European integration. I used to represent political institutions with this triangle, because you see at the bottom you have the European Parliament. You see that the European Parliament is at the bottom because it is the only institution that is directly legitimized by the people. Since 1979, we have direct elections of our members in the European Parliament. And, of course, the interests that are represented and should be promoted by the European Parliament are the interests of all EU citizens. Then we have the European Commission, the same. The Commission should promote the general interests of all European citizens. And then we have the so-called intergovernmental institutions. The institution in the framework of which the interests that prevail are the specific interests of the member states. And this very often means the most important member states, because you have the Council of Ministers that is composed of the ministers of the member states. And then you have the European Council that is composed of the heads of state or government of the member states. So when you have these institutions, the first question you have to ask yourself is, what is its composition? Because the composition will tell you what is the nature of this institution, more supranational or intergovernmental. Supranational means that it promotes the general interests of all EU citizens. Intergovernmental, specific interests of the governments of the member states. And then something more on the institutions. First of all, you see here European Parliament, it's the voice of the people. I have selected this slide, this table on the allocations of seats in the European Parliament, because it shows you that it is not the same if you are a big country like Germany or a smaller country like Cyprus or Malta. Also in terms of seats in the Parliament, you see that Germany, that have a larger population, have more seats means? This means what? This means that not all the member states of the European Union play the same role in the process of decision making. If you are a larger member state, you weight more in the process of decision making. You have more weight. Then, we also, this is only to show you that there are also European political parties, even if they are not really political parties, but coalitions of national parties that belong to the same political groups. And then this on the European Commission, you see that it should promote the common interest, but that's a problem, because if you look at how commissions are selected, you see that in this process they are first of all nominated by the national government. So they should behave independently once they become commissioner, but they have this close link with the government that has appointed them, and this strongly reduces their independence. Then, the Council of Ministers, the voice of the member states. You can imagine when the ministers of the member states meet in the framework of the Council, their priority is to promote and to defend the interests of the countries they come from. And it is, this is also interesting, how they vote. I want to show you this because, again, it shows you that if you are a big country, it's not, your decision is more important on the process of decision making. You see here, for example, that on most decisions, the Council decides through this double majority. Look at how this double majority works. You have a first majority that is 55% of the member states, which means 16 countries. So if it is Cyprus or Germany, it's the same, okay? But then, according to the second majority, member states must represent 65% of the EU population. You see that it means, it involves that you have Germany rather than Cyprus in voting in favor of this decision. You have more chances to obtain this double majority. So again, it's not the same if you are a small or a big country in the process of decision making in the European Union. And think, for example, you can apply this also to countries that might join the European Union in the future, like Turkey, for example. Turkey, with its big and fastly growing population, might become the most important player in the process of EU decision making. Then, this is the European Council. We are at the top of the pyramid, okay, of this triangle, heads of state of governments. They take most important decisions on the future of the process of European integration. Most important decisions are decisions on deepening and widening, and they take these decisions with unanimity. So you see that it's the heads of state and government that steer the process of European integration. And then, to complete this picture, you see that we have 3 presidents and also 1 high representative for foreign affairs and security policy. Why we have 3 presidents? Because you see that we have the president of the European Parliament, then we also have the president of the European Commission, and then we also have the president of the European Council. This doesn't facilitate also among EU citizens an understanding of what the European Union is. And then, in addition, we have the High Representative of Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, initially in the constitutional treaty, the name of this position was Minister of Foreign Affairs. But for some member states, it was too much to talk of a Minister of Foreign Affairs. And so this is the reason why we have this long expression to refer to this person that is responsible of implementing common foreign security policy, which is decided with unanimity by the member states. And then, and this is my last slide, to show you, on the one hand, the institutional complexity of the European Union, and on the other hand, to give you an idea of what the European Union has accomplished during this process of European integration. You see that in 2012, the European Union was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. There was a lot of criticism after these decisions, but apart from that, I want to show you that 3 presidents went to the ceremony for the award because they didn't know who to select among them, and so all of them went there. And then what is important to underline is the motivation that you read. And the European Union was awarded this Peace Prize because it had facilitated the exchange in the relations among European countries. You know that at the beginning, at the end of the Second World War, the relations among European countries were characterized by conflict, war, while now, thanks also to this process of European integration, they have become peaceful. And being part of this organization has also facilitated the consolidation of democracy among its members and acceding new members. So I conclude with this. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We will move to our next speaker and then save your questions for Professor Baracani for a little later, before the break. After this talk, both Professor Baracani and also Professor Irina Isaakyan will take your questions. Irina Isaakyan is a research associate of the Cultural Pluralism Research Area for a project called Ithaca. She recently completed her Marie Curie Intra-EU Fellowship, which was awarded for the project on female migration from developed countries in Southern Europe. She obtained her PhD from the University of Edinburgh, and she holds a master's degree from the University of Minnesota. After completing her PhD, she received an ESRC postdoctoral fellowship, this was in 2008-2009, to examine European integration and new researchers' mobility in Scotland. In 2010, she researched the issues of integration and civic engagement of US national academics in the UK. Before joining the EU, she was a reader at the Ryerson State Radio Engineering University in Russia between 2011 and 12, and a research fellow at the University of Edinburgh 2008-2010. Her research interests include nationalism and diaspora studies, immigrants' identities and social remittances, and interpretative, whatever you say, sociologia interpretativa. Thank you for coming address our students, Dr. Isaakyan, and I know you're not too well with your throat, and so I hope this will not be too hard on it. Thank you again. Please come to the stage. Yes, yes.
Hi, I'm very happy to talk to you today. Unfortunately, I'm really very bad with my voice and I won't be able to talk for a long time. But first of all, we shall see a short movie about irregular migration and critical issues that might arise. And after that, I will make a short summary of the irregular migration conditions.
You want the light off or can you see well? Va bene.
Okay, I have an issue here.
Some say that he does have ties to Muslim extremists. I don't know.
These faces have been haunting television screens and newspaper headlines over the past few years, telling us the harrowing stories of death, starvation, and abuse. Each year, thousands of asylum seekers from Africa and the Middle East stream towards the shores of Europe. Many of them have to cross the Mediterranean Sea, the world's deadliest border, in rickety boats and in unseaworthy ships. So far this year, more than 300,000 people have embarked on this perilous sea voyage. People are on the move as never before, and an exodus of biblical proportions is underway. But the key question is, why do thousands of people from far-flung corners of the globe abandon their homes every day and gamble with their own lives in the wild waves of the Mediterranean? Is it just for a better life and a brighter future, or is it a matter of life and death, and migration is a last resort of helpless people in the face of adversity? These people, with all their griefs and sorrows, make up just part of the story. How about Europe and the way she treats her uninvited guests? As German Chancellor Angela Merkel has pointed out, this crisis is an even bigger test than the economic meltdown in Greece. In fact, the crisis will be the acid test for European values, equality, democracy, human rights, or perhaps a requiem for them all. Will Europe be committed to her ideals? Only time will tell. In 2013, about 232 million people left their homelands throughout the world for different reasons. Some of them were economic migrants pursuing a better life in affluent countries, but the majority of them were asylum seekers fleeing war, persecution, and poverty. Before the fall of the Libyan dictator Muammar Gaddafi, the numbers of asylum seekers to the green continent were declining. But the colonel's ouster in 2011 set off the country's descent into chaos, making life hard and at times impossible in this part of the world. On the other hand, the country's deteriorating security, a serious repercussion of the NATO invasion, has made Libyan coasts a stepping stone to Europe. Thousands of Eritreans fleeing long-term conscription, along with large numbers of Somalis and Nigerians, head for Europe from this country. In the eastern Mediterranean, Syrians cross in their thousands from Turkey to Greece, with other war-stricken companions from Afghanistan and Iraq.
We are sad because of the Syria.
They don't know that we are human, and they have to treat us like a human. We need food, we need a place to sleep.
Some females are here, they are pregnant, so we need a medical care for them.
The way was water, we passed by sea, and the sea was just a game playing with the life.
I'm a student of chemistry.
I studied chemistry in Velasquez University.
Going for the bus, pushing people, you know, I lost my two sons behind me.
Scary, fear, bombs, war, killing, death, Daesh, Nusra.
The Syrian conflict has torn the nation asunder, leaving thousands dead and forcing millions to abandon their homes. As ISIL continues its march of death and destruction against humanity, many seek refuge in neighboring countries, yet some of them pay traffickers to take them to Europe, whatever the cost: humiliation, deportation, capture, or even death. In the drama of the migrants' desperation to find a new life, Europe can play either a protagonist or an antagonist's role, either to offer them sanctuary or to treat them like toxic waste, to respect them as human beings or to steer clear of them as if they were insects.
This is very testing, I accept that, because you've got a swarm of people coming across the Mediterranean, seeking a better life, wanting to come to Britain, because Britain has got jobs, it's got a growing economy, it's an incredible place to live, but we need to protect our borders.
On paper, the EU has a common asylum system. In reality, it doesn't. And in practice, its state members are not working hand in glove. Britain and France accuse each other of being a soft touch on asylum seekers. Hungary and Greece are building razor wire fences to keep refugees out, and Italy has reduced its rescue missions after the rest of the European countries stopped shouldering part of the crisis. Claiming threats to national security and economic stability, these governments are erecting fences, patrolling the seas, pushing asylum seekers back at borders, and denying them the right to apply for asylum. In fact, the European Union is spending more on deterrence than on improving reception conditions. More refugees are fleeing to Europe than at any time in the last few decades, and an unacceptable number are dying in horrific ways. But as for a solution or even a policy, the EU has come up with none, remaining unable to formulate a coherent plan for the continent. 300,000 lives are at stake, and yet the member states don't appear to be in a hurry.
There is no simple nor single answer to the challenges posed by migration. And nor can any member state effectively address migration alone. It is clear that we need this new, more European approach.
The asylum seekers have escaped war and famine to rebuild their lives in other parts of the world. But how many hurdles do they have to get over before that? Murder, rape, plunder, pillage, drowning, dying in trucks, and still they have to sail on into an uncertain future. They've lost everything, and they have to start anew. But against a backdrop of resistance and reluctance on behalf of politicians and anti-immigration parties.
At the moment, the European Union's common asylum policy has absolutely no means whatsoever of checking anybody's background. And I would say that we must not allow our compassion to imperil our safety. The only way to stop the deaths is to stop the boats from coming.
The world is facing a massive refugee crisis, yet there is something missing from the international community: compassion. When will the world stop sitting on its hands, come hell or high water?
Thank you very much. This short movie actually shows the general picture around what is going on at the moment in relation to asylum seeking and refugee crisis. Just in general, there are a few definitions that we need to understand before we speak about irregular migrations and refugees. What is asylum seeking? Asylum seeking is a phenomenon under which a variety of issues can be considered, can fall. Asylum seeking is seeking settlement and resettlement, naturalization in another country based on the grounds of persecution that could be political, economic, socio-cultural. For example, persecution on the basis of economic deprivation, when the person is not oppressed politically, is not considered a public enemy, but faces difficulties finding a job for the reason of his ethnicity or other affiliation. Also, socio-cultural persecution like religious affiliation, which was taking place in the Soviet Union. But the problem is that all these persecutions may be very closely interconnected. A politically oppressed person usually faces difficulties finding a job or being accepted socio-culturally, and the socio-culturally marginalized person is often seen as a politically marginalized subject. So that's the major criterion for being classified as an asylum seeker: to be oppressed, to be an undesired element in your home country. Another interesting question: how to prove this undesirability? How to prove your eligibility for asylum seeking? For example, if one of you wants to apply for asylum seeking in the United States or another country, you cannot just say, I've been oppressed. You have to prove that you have been persecuted politically, economically, socio-culturally. So how to prove it? What should be the proof? A physical evidence, loss of job? Who is going to check it? Who is going to verify? Because there will be the process of verification. And that's the issue. Because asylum seeking is not a new phenomenon, although it has been spoken a lot recently in relation to Africa, Asia, North Africa. Although there are lots of movies and clips with all these boats filled with deprived people, it's not a new phenomenon. Look back at the time, let us say in the 1970s, 80s, there were lots of asylum applications from the former Soviet Union and former socialist bloc to the US, to Europe. And you would say that these asylum seeker profiles were very much different from what you see here in this movie, actually. Because the conditions, the criteria for being classified as an asylum seeker were different, and the process of verification was different. In the Soviet Union, for example, when a Soviet person like myself in the 1970s or 80s would like to apply for an asylum seeking based on the grounds of anti-Jewish persecution or communist persecution, it would not be very difficult to prove, because the home state itself, the Soviet Union as an example, would make no barriers obstructing the process of verification. Moreover, that was part of the Cold War game. Right now, it's much more challenging to prove that you have been assaulted, persecuted, deprivated, because the whole world is swept by the crisis. What is going on to people who claim to be economically deprived is actually going on to wealthier people who just lose their jobs because of the crisis. So the global world is actually becoming less supportive, and the mechanisms for verification are becoming more and more complex. This multi-level governance, it makes everything more complicated. Another issue is what irregular migration is. It is often understood synonymous as that of asylum seeking, which is not the same. Irregular migration means any type of unauthorized entrance to the country and unauthorized settlement and work. Under this phenomenon may fall illegal migration, for example, importing illegal refugees or potential asylum seekers like you saw in the movie. However, the migrant may be in the country quite legally, like a high-skilled migrant having a work permit to work for a particular employer or a student visa. However, this migrant may do some additional work unauthorized. For example, the student visa does not allow many hours of work or doing whatever the person wants in many countries. And still many students are involved in so-called irregular work. So this borderline between irregular migration, illegal migration, asylum seeking is often blurred and invisible in both policy making and scholarly research, which makes the picture even more complicated, because policymakers are people who usually face no compassion. Like when the journalist said, "Have compassion," it was the message to you, to the masses. Policymakers, lawyers are more specific, more straightforward, and they need a more straightforward language for their decisions. If you have a look at the accepting countries, you can roughly divide Europe into northern countries, Northern Europe, and Southern Europe. The difference in processing asylum-seeking applications and claims is, roughly speaking, the following. Southern Europe countries such as Spain, Greece, Italy, they are geographically very close to the regions of conflict, which actually become sources of refugees and asylum seekers. Therefore, these countries accept larger numbers of refugees, but they act as filters, because the majority of refugees actually target more advanced economies like those of Northern Europe, which are relatively well protected from undesired migrants and refugees, and therefore their problem is adequate and non-discriminate processing of of asylum-seeking applications. The most desirable countries which receives the highest, one of the most desirable countries which receive the highest number of asylum-seeking applications is Germany, because it is always desired by asylum seekers from all over the world. Another interesting issue is actually who is the asylum seeker. What should be the profile of the migrant seeking asylum? You saw one profile in the movie, a highly deprivated victim of abuse, war, conflict, which is absolutely legitimate, and this is the majority of asylum seeking now. However, let us not forget that asylum seekers are not always uneducated people. Quite a few of asylum seekers are very highly educated people holding degrees from their countries of origin. And another reality is that the world is becoming so much global that the streams of irregular migration, asylum seeking, and high-skill migration are very closely interconnected. Right now, asylum seeking is also seen as an alternative mechanism for high-skilled labor, because the high-skilled legislature, high-skilled immigration law in many OECD countries is becoming extremely restrictive. If you look at the majority of legislation decisions in relation to high-skilled workers, they are extremely restrictive. It's difficult to enter the country on a work permit or on a point-based system. You have to prove that you are high-skilled. However, there is more flexibility given to alternative mechanisms such as marriage migration, asylum seeking, family reunification, and there is a large percentage of high-skilled migrants from other countries than the European Union who are seeking asylum just hoping that that would be the entrance to the labor market. And in this case, the situation is quite dangerous. What can be actually done? What proposals can be put forward for European policymakers to improve their asylum-seeking and irregular migration practices? First of all, there should be separate reception at first country and separate processing at another country, because the reality of processing asylum-seeking applications is the following. When your application for asylum-seeking is rejected in one country, let us say in Italy, you cannot anymore apply for asylum-seeking in any other member state of the European Union. So the rejection is uniform across the European Union. However, the positive decision of granting you the asylum-seeking status is not uniform. If you get an asylum seeker status in one country like Germany, it doesn't mean that you have the same status in the UK. You will still be a third country national. So one of the propositions of our propositions is to separate the reception in the first country when the person undergoes filter and processing in another desired country to give the person more flexibility launching an application. It doesn't have to be in a country where you have been accepted. Another thing is reconsideration of relocation quotas and relocation criteria. In this context, it might be also more ethical to speak about revising criteria rather than just numbers, quotas of how many people should be accepted as asylum seekers, rather than who actually should fall under this category. And one of the ways is to reconsider high-skill migration schemes like the Blue Card scheme and give more flexibility to high-skill migrants so they could enter more freely, settle and stay. And that would create actually more safety than just to process large numbers of refugees, many of whom may not fall under this category. It will not solve all the problem with refugee seeking, but if this happened, many people actually who claim to be refugees would follow another route, and that would be easier to track these people. Another proposal could be joint processing of asylum seeking claims with ESO, European Asylum Support Office officers, international officers, and mutual recognition of positive asylum decisions between them and the targeted countries of destination. How realistic these proposals will be in practice, to be honest, I don't know. It's hard to say because every program, every proposal is a little bit utopic. But a slight revision of the high-skill migration schemes seems relatively more realistic to me. This is something that could be accomplished. And that would actually help more people find better entrance routes to desired countries. Okay. Unfortunately, I cannot talk any longer now. Maybe you will ask questions to me or to Elena.
Thank
or
you.
to each other.
Thank you very much to the both of you. So, as you can tell, I'm not reading, when I introduce the speakers, I'm not reading the title of their talk because you have a full-fledged program with you. But what we heard was the first talk on the EU, what it is and what it does. The second talk had to do with one of the main issues the whole of the EU is facing, and that is migration and the Syrian crisis and asylum seekers. So now it's our turn, everybody's turn, to ask questions of our first two speakers. Thank you again. Yes, and please say your names as you do that.
Hi, my name is Christine.
Do you need the mic? Maybe. Can you hear me? Yes, we need the mic.
Thanks. I had a question for Professor Baracani. I was wondering, with the European Neighborhood Policy partners, are those essentially like bilateral agreements between said partner and the EU? Or are those countries kind of put in a space where they're supposed to interact with each other? Like the Eastern, Southern, and Northern, like all of those different regions, do they then have more bridges built between them? Or is it just between them and the EU?
Okay.
So there's a microphone.
Okay, I can answer immediately. Okay, so the European Neighborhood Policy is an external policy of the European Union that has been designed to rule relations with the new neighbors, and it is implemented both at a bilateral level and at a multilateral level. Bilateral level means that the objective of this policy is to sign specific bilateral agreement with each of the ENP partners in order to promote economic cooperation, political dialogue, and also to establish relations in order to deal with, for example, migration issues. And then there is also a regional framework of the ENP and a more multilateral framework, because the idea of the European Union, this is also a norm that the European Union is always promoting in its external relations, is regionalism, regional cooperation. So the European Union has also, in the framework of the ENP, more specific regional approaches towards eastern neighbors, that is the Eastern Partnership, and towards southern neighbors, that is what used to be the Barcelona process and the Union for the Mediterranean. So you can see that the ENP is a sort of an umbrella framework, and then relations with each ENP partners are implemented at bilateral level, in a regional framework, in the context, in the more general context of this policy. Did I answer your question? So if you want, you have both. You have both bilateral relations, but then the European Union is also encouraging regional cooperation among the neighbors that belong to the same region.
My name is Roger.
Roger.
My question is about migration, and specifically about the European public's opinion on migration. And do we have information on what the average European thinks about this influx of refugees and plays into the debate?
Okay. Do you want to start?
The European public opinions about migration in general are not very positive. In particular, if you have a look at the countries such as the UK, for example, or France, there has been a significant mark of deterioration, indicating negative attitudes of public towards migrants, particularly in the UK, with the advent of the new government in 2010, when all these visas for high-skilled migrants were immediately deteriorating. In general, this is the society which is marked by high levels of intolerance on the public level to all kinds of migrants. And particularly, the situation with refugee seekers, asylum seekers are very complicated, because who they are, what kinds of people they are, just ordinary people, laymen don't understand. They mix into this category even highly skilled migrants. That is why the deterioration of the high-skilled migration law went so easily, because it was supported by the public opinion that actually high-skilled migrants are stealing our comfort, are stealing our jobs. And when the Oxford University conducted a survey, a large-scale survey in the UK in 2012, studying public attitudes of people towards migrants, they figured out that the majority of UK people, even those who have higher education, tertiary educated people, they actually understand high-skilled migrants like foreign engineers equivalent to asylum seekers, and they don't see a difference, a lot of difference between asylum seekers and high-skilled migrants. And in their responses, they were using this terminology: asylum seekers, refugees, migrant, high-skilled migrants, expatriates, interchangeably, talking about one and the same person. And if you have a look at particularly 2013 speeches of their Prime Minister, how he was supporting discursively his argument, like we have to protect, like here, we have to protect our borders from invaders, from people who steal our comfort, meaning high-skilled migrants. He was justifying the deterioration of the migration scheme and the gradual elimination of Tier 1 visa. He was saying because the public wants it, our people want their jobs for themselves, and we have to respond to the public needs. Something like that, maybe a much softer situation, but something like that was observed both in Germany, in France, even in the United States, although it's not a European country, we're not talking about it now, even in the United States, the most current revision of the law was accompanied with tensions on the public level. So in general, the situation is actually bordering with xenophobia in many European societies. It's not easy. It's not easy.
If I can add something on the perception that EU citizens have of the European Union and how it is managing the crisis. So from the other side of the relations, not the migrants, but what the European Union and what it is not doing. The impression that the public, EU citizens have is that the European Union is not able to solve this crisis we have. But what they don't realize is that the European Union doesn't really have the instruments to solve this crisis because the member states don't want to delegate this power to EU institutions. I think this is an important message to give you, okay? So consider also this, the relationship between the European Union on the one hand and EU citizens is not an easy relationship because EU citizens don't know how the European Union works and national politicians don't really favor this process of knowing exactly what the European Union can do and cannot do. But when the European Union cannot do something, it's because of the member states. Okay? And then one more thing on how this refugee crisis is addressed. What we see in Europe is that you can address exactly the same topic, the same crisis from different perspectives. So one perspective can be the one of Fortress Europe. So the European Union that, and maybe this is the prevailing in EU citizens, okay? You see this migration crisis as a challenge for the European Union, as a security challenge, something of which you have to defend yourself. You have to defend what you have already accomplished. So the well-being of EU citizens, these type of things. But on the other hand, you can address the same crisis from a different perspective, which is the perspective of the rights of these persons, so asylum seekers, for example. And it completely changes what is the answer in terms of policies that you can design, that you can implement. So this is what I wanted to add.
So you're saying that there's 28 correct in the EU right now. Do you think that, like in your opinion, it's at a point where it's running efficiently, or is it getting too big and spreading itself too thin, or is it like with 28 countries, you're saying how it doesn't necessarily have the tools to deal with migration? Does it need even more power to work efficiently, or how do you think the size of it is working right now?
Asylum, you mean?
The size of the EU, like with the number of countries and the power it has.
Obviously, it is affecting decision making because many decisions, for example, I was talking of the Council of Ministers. Many important decisions, for example, on relocation of migrants were taken by the Council of Ministers for Interior Affairs. And usually decisions in the Council are taken with consensus. consensus means that even if they are not voting, there should be consensus among themselves. And so, as you can imagine, when you are a group of 28 countries which meets ministers, it's not easy to reach consensus. So obviously decision making among this large group of different countries with different national interests is not facilitating the process of adopting common decisions in order to solve this crisis. And this is also what I was referring when what I meant when I was saying that the European Union doesn't really have the tools to address this crisis. And when it tries to do something, it's extremely difficult to reach common decisions. You have an emergency. You see all these persons, children. But then you have, on the other hand, a process of decision making that is extremely complex, and then at the end, it's also difficult to reach a common decision. Then there is an additional problem. Once you have reached a decision, the decision has to be implemented. And who has to implement the common decision reached? The member states. Again, another problem. So you see that it's not easy for the European Union as it is now to manage this crisis, as other crises that may come.
Hi, I'm Margaret. I'd like to, I was thinking during your presentations, one of your presentations, the case of Syria and the refugees from Syria, and I think it's a good case to understand, also considering the role of Turkey in the situation. I think it shows how enlargement is taking place, how at the same time refugee crisis is dealt with at the EU level, but at the same time at the member state level, because I'm having difficulty in understanding how Germany is playing such a big role, while for example, High Representative responsible for foreign policy has quite a limited role. So what are the implications, and what are the policy implications in terms of Syrian crisis? And on the other hand, what are the implications in terms of deficits for EU actors and EU's role at the global level? It's quite a comprehensive question.
Yeah, but very, very important issues. Okay. There are so many things to say about implications of the conflict in Syria in terms of migration. The first things to say is that what the European Union could have done is to foresee this crisis and try to prevent it. Because when you have a conflict, when you have a humanitarian crisis, what you can expect is exactly an increase in the number of persons that will leave these countries to find a better place. And if you look at what the European Union did in the last years, there was no attempt to prevent this. You know that from a foreign policy perspective, we don't have also a security strategy in which the European Union has clearly stated what are its priorities in foreign policy. We know that we have some geographic priorities with our neighboring countries and the neighbors of our neighbors, from where instability comes. But the European Union doesn't have a specific strategy of foreign policy. With this, I mean that it doesn't have specific objectives towards specific geographic areas. And if you don't have this strategy in your mind, how can you plan the policy tools to use to prevent migration crisis, humanitarian crisis, these type of things. So there is a problem, I would say, first of all, in the foreign policy institutional architecture of the European Union. So the European Union is not able to prevent challenges, different type of challenges, and this has to do with, again, this complex institutional architecture of the European Union. Then on implications of this, for example, and the case of, if you want, the relations between Syria, Turkey and the European Union are quite interesting, because you see that, for example, because of this migration crisis, this challenge that the European Union had to face, it led de facto to a change in the bilateral relations between EU and Turkey, because now Turkey has become a fundamental partner from the point of view of the European Union to deal with a lot of migrants that Turkey is taken in its country. And so this has very important consequences also in terms of EU external relations with other countries, because it means, for example, that if the European Union needs the support of Turkey to deal with migrants that come from Syria, it means that the European Union cannot ask anymore Turkey to do reforms that are important to become a member of the European Union. I don't know if you have seen, but a few weeks ago Erdogan was in Brussels and with President of the European Commission Juncker, and the only topic on their agenda was the migration issue. Okay, so they didn't talk of enlargement anymore. And this was something that, from the point of view of Erdogan, was okay, because it was a way to recognize that Turkey was a strategic partner in dealing with this foreign policy priority of the European Union. So you can see, in terms of implications, how dealing with the migration crisis can also have consequences with relations with countries in the area. And then your next question was on, you're right, there's this problem. Why Germany is so important when we have to take decisions on how to solve this migration crisis, why we have a high representative for foreign affairs and security policy that is not playing such a huge role. Because when you have to deal with these issues of foreign policy, it's the member states who are the most important actors in the process of decision making. And obviously the most important member state will play the leader role. What the High Representative can do is only implement decisions that have been taken by the member states, the governments of the member states of the European Union. Implement, and then what she could also do is propose solutions. These two things. Propose solutions and then implement decision taken. But as you can see, cannot decide. The decisions are in the hands of the member states, which means obviously the most important ones. I think that's the question.
We started a little late, so we have quite a few more minutes.
Continuing the question about Turkey, how does the fact that Turkey is an Islamic country, is that something that Turkey being an Islamic country, are people talking openly about that clear cultural difference? And I know, I forget which Eastern European prime minister said they would only accept Christian migrants. could you talk specifically about this, because it seems to be something that people in the U.S. may not be aware of or fully understand that difference.
Okay. Okay, Irina, do you want to answer you? Yeah, that's true. This is mainly a question for me. Yes, I would say that this is a topic that is considered, but I would say that it is more an excuse, okay? So saying that Turkey is culturally different from the other European countries. What would happen if Turkey joins the European Union, and what I think the member states really fear, is that it would become the most important member state in the process of decision making in the EU because of its population. So more seats in the European Parliament, a fundamental member state in terms of the double majority. And so I think this is more than enough to understand the opposition of key members like Germany. Then consider also the budget of the European Union. Small budget, okay, but the largest percentage of the budget is used for what? Common agriculture policy and cohesion policy. So Turkey would become would benefit of both these policy. But this means if Turkey is going to benefit of this policy, this means that the same resources won't be allocated anymore to the countries, to the members that previously received them. So you see that the membership of Turkey would really change the dynamics of power in the European Union. So it is true that when you ask the people, so you citizens, but also politicians in the European Union, what they say is that Turkey is different culturally, and so it should not join the European Union. But I don't think it's the real motivation. It's more an excuse, I would say, than the truth. But what will happen very likely is that Turkey won't join the European Union. The Turkish membership of the European Union is currently not realistic at all. Especially now that the European Union is facing this crisis, Eurozone crisis, which is also a crisis of legitimacy by its citizens. Then you know that when you want to enlarge, you also now need democratic legitimacy for a new enlargement. And your question is very appropriate in this direction, because there is no legitimacy by the people for a Turkish membership of the European Union, because they see now that the European Union has still problems to solve this economic crisis. So how can you think to enlarge to such huge and, if you want, problematic country like Turkey? But the attitude has changed in Turkey as well, with serious consequences for Turkish citizens.
Other questions? So let me ask you one question, and that has to do with Henry Kissinger, as you know, famously stated, when you need to call Europe, you do not know who to call. If you need to speak with Europe, you do not know who to call. This was a famous statement to say the EU did not get a common foreign policy. Now, the new Alto Commissario per gli affari internazionali happens to be a woman, and she happens to be Italian. So my question is twofold for you. One, does Europe have a common foreign policy today because of this role? Two, what is the role of Italy? This was quite a position, so to speak, to get for a woman and for somebody from Italy. What is the role of Italy as a founding member of the EU? But what is the role of Italy in the EU today? What is it like?
Very difficult questions. Okay, so on common foreign security policy. Do we, I'm currently teaching in Bologna, Europe in war politics and external relations of the European Union, so I'm always working with my students on EU foreign policy. And so the question is very challenging. Is there a common foreign, does the European Union have a European foreign policy? I would say that the European Union has really many tools, foreign policy tools at its disposal. But it is not able to make the best use of these tools because, for example, it has problems in reaching a common decision on what tool should be used, or because it has not a strategy, so it doesn't know what to do towards a specific country or specific crisis. But what I can tell you is that during this process of deepening of European integration, there has been also a process of constructing a European Union foreign policy. And if you look at what are the tools at the disposal of the European Union, most important foreign policy tools are what I would call non-conventional foreign policy tools. Non-conventional foreign policy tools are economic assistance, for example. If you look at what the European Union is doing with its 6% of the budget, what the European Union is doing is giving economic assistance. But economic assistance is important in foreign policy because it can help to address, for example, the socio-economic problems that are at the origins of conflicts. Okay, so economic assistance can be a very important foreign policy tool. Then consider also what the European Union managed to do with another foreign policy tool, enlargement. So offering some countries the perspective of joining the European Union, the European Union was able to facilitate their domestic process of reformation, of adopting political and economic reforms in order to join the European Union. And enlargement was defined as the most successful foreign policy of the European Union. So the European Union doesn't have a conventional foreign policy, a foreign policy that is done with military tools, because we don't have a common and permanent army. The European Union now has the possibility to intervene in crisis situation with the deployment of a military or civilian missions, but we don't have an European army. So in terms of conventional tools, no. But in terms of non-conventional tools, the European Union can do something with its foreign policy. I'm thinking, for example, also to your relations with Western Balkan countries. The European Union is doing a lot in this geographic area, but do you see the European Union managed to do a lot when it has a comprehensive framework for foreign policy, which is offering these countries a membership perspective, giving them a lot of economic assistance, but also technical assistance, which means socialize the political elite, but also civil servants in these countries with the practice of the European Union. So when the European Union used this comprehensive approach, which means all these different non-conventional foreign policy tools, it can make a difference. But then in other cases you see that the European Union has no role to play. And then on the role of Italy. Role of Italy. This is an even more difficult question. You know that how it works. De facto what is happening is that each member state has its own commissioner. And the High Representative, so Federica Mogherini, is double-headed, which means is representing both the Commission and the Council. And she was nominated by the Renzi government, and of course it is very important, I would say, to have an Italian High Representative in. It is very important also considering all those challenges that we could expect from Syria, from Libya, but at the same time, I can tell you that when I was listening to her hearing in front of the European Parliament, because all European commissioners have to go through this process of hearing in front of the European Parliament, it was last year in September of October, she was not mentioning the problems that could come in terms of migration from Libya as well as Syria. Okay, so I don't know, but when we study the role of the High Representative, the most important one we had was Javier Solana, and his appointment in 1999, I think it was 1999, he was the former Secretary General of NATO. His appointment was considered as a signal of the fact that EU member states really wanted the European Union to play a key role in foreign policy, because he had a lot of expertise. While we cannot say the same thing with the appointment first of Catherine Ashton, that was the first High Representative, and then the same with Mogherini, even if she's very dedicated and she's doing a lot of things.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes. I just wanted to add that particularly in high-skill migration initiatives, Italy has been quite active.
Yes.
Of course, its success cannot be compared at this stage with the success of Germany, for example, which is a more experienced immigrant state. But in general, in the milieu of this expanding crisis, when many countries are actually restricting their high-skill migration laws like the UK, Italy is looking really good. If you have a look at the Blue Card initiative, which is another political project of unifying Europe and doing something equivalent to the Green Card in North America, the Blue Card scheme, the majority of European countries have not been successful. They still prefer and they return to the national schemes. And the majority of high-skill migration decisions are taken purely nationally. The unquestionable leader is Germany, and another country which looks really good in implementing blue card schemes, supporting high-skilled migrants' entrance and accommodation, and particularly entrepreneurship is Italy. And this looks really good, even if we compare it with Canada, because in Canada, post-2012, there was an anti-entrepreneur initiative. So Italy is looking not bad at all.
My question was actually along those lines. Which country do you think will eventually accept most of the majority of the immigrants? Do you think because they're trying to go to more advanced northern countries that it'll be those countries like Germany or the UK, or will that change? If you could answer that.
I think it will not be the UK, because they are evidently, well, this is what I think, the reality may be different, but I think it will not be the UK because they're becoming very restrictive. By now it is Germany which is leading in accepting asylum-seeking applications and highly skilled migrants, all kinds of migrants in Europe. And this is one of the main competitors to North America or Australia. However, if we compare Germany and Italy, they're too different in size and in immigration histories and in being impacted by the crisis. It seems to me that Italy would accept quite a few immigrants, quite a few, and also will Germany. So I would expect them to be quite leading in hosting migrants, but not the UK.
Sorry, to follow up on that, do you think that's because the UK, since they're not part of the Eurozone, isn't as much tied to the interdependence, that if one of, like Germany, if other countries were to absorb immigrants and not be able to burden that on their economy, Germany would feel the effects from that? So do you think that it's sort of a, we're all in this together, if Germany kind of sticks its neck out because it knows it can't face this, where other countries like Greece would not be able to support as many immigrants, it could only exacerbate the Euro crisis that's going on right now?
I can only say for sure that from my research experience, from what I know about the UK, one of the contributors to the situation is its rising levels of xenophobia and anti-immigrant public attitudes and the particular positioning. As far as the role of the UK in the European Union is concerned, this is not particularly the question of my expertise, so maybe Elena will answer it.
No, what I would underline is that migrants also want to go to Germany or the UK. So it's they make a selection of the countries, the member states where they want to go. So for most of them, they don't want to stay in Italy, for example. And then what we see also among the member states is that, for example, what is saying on Germany is that Germany is trying to take the most skilled migrants. And while in Italy probably will remain only less skilled migrants. But on why Germany rather the UK, I don't know, I'm not able to answer you.
So we move forward with our talks this morning, and I have the pleasure of introducing Professor Veronica de Romanis, who received her master's and PhD in economics from Columbia University. She is teaching undergraduates in Rome, and she's teaching them the European fiscal policy. This is at the Università Europea in Rome. And she is also teaching an MBA course on the European financial crisis. This one is at the LUIS, Libera Università degli Studi Sociali. It's a very prestigious university in Rome, where she teaches, again, as part of their MBA course. She also teaches a wonderful class on the politics of the European crisis at Stanford in Florence. So those of you here this quarter know Professor de Romanis quite well. From 2001 to 2007, she served as a member of the Council of Economic Advisors for the Italian Ministry of the Economy and Finance, Ministero dell'Economia e della Finanza in Italy. So she's somebody who practices what she preaches, because not only does she do it as an academician, but also as a counselor to the key players in Italian politics. She's the author of a variety of books. Let me mention a few here. Il caso Germania, così la Merkel salva l'Europa. The case of Germany, this is how Merkel saves Europe. And this was published by Marsilio Editori in 2013. And then another book on Merkel called Il metodo Merkel, il pragmatismo alla guida dell'Europa. The Merkel method, pragmatism as leading, guiding Europe. She's also a frequent contributor to Italian newspapers, websites, and weekly magazines, including Il Messaggero, Asperia, Panorama, First Online. Dr. de Romanis is also a member of the Financial Account Working Party of Eurostat. She's a member of the board of the Società per lo Sviluppo del Mercato dei Fondi Pensione, and is part of the Comitato di Indirizzo e Coordinamento dell'Informazione Statistica. Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation to participate in this workshop today.
So thank you for the presentation. So thank you also for organizing this seminar. I think it's very important, especially for American students, to know more about Europe. I think in a way you are lucky, let's use this word, lucky to be in Europe now, because Europe is experiencing a very interesting period in the sense that now there is the worst financial crisis since the Second World War. So I think for people arriving from the US, it's very important to understand what's going on and why, which kind of solutions are we trying to find, and why maybe the solutions are not as easy as in the US. So as I said, it's important to understand why the crisis and why, for example, some countries like Greece, and that's the reason why we will focus on Greece, is still not recovering from the crisis. And it's important not only for us as Europeans, but I think it's also important for you as a citizen of the United States that Europe will recover soon, and in particular Greece will recover soon. Let me remember you that President Obama has put lots of pressure on the European leaders in order to find a solution on Greece. Why this? Because Greece, even though if it's a very small, tiny country, and we will see that in a minute, is very important also for the United States. And for the United States in general, it's very important to have a strong European Union. Why? First of all, for financial reason, for commercial reason, and also for geopolitical reason. We have talked before about immigrations, and it's very important for the United States to have a strong Europe and a strong European growth. So that's why the European crisis, and in particular the Greek case, is very important, not only for us, but also for the United States. So, as I said, it's not easy for Europe to find a solution to the crisis. Why? Elena has explained that very well before, because we have one money, but we have 19 European different national budgets. So that means that we have one money, but we have 19 treasury departments, 19 different ministers of finance. It's not like in the US where you have the dollar and then you have one treasury. Here you have the euro, which is shared among these 19 countries, and then you have 19 different national policies. So 19 different people, ministers, who decide which taxes, which expenditures, what to do with the deficit, what to do with the debt. And it's their own decision. So this creates a problem. Why? Because we are not in a political union. And this, I think, it's one of the answers of the immigration problem. So the big difference between the US and the European Union is that the US is a political union. That's why you have one president, who is Mr. Obama. In Europe, you have a European monetary union, and we will see that in a minute, in the sense that we share the euro, but it's not a political union. We don't have one president. That is very, very important. And we will see in my conclusion that this is where we have to go in the future. Okay, so we will concentrate today on the Greek case. And I will make 3 points. Wait, let me see if it works. Sorry, okay, it works. So the first will be, why do we need European fiscal rules? What went wrong with the Greek case? And do we need more Europe? In the sense, do we need a political union like in the US? So, as I said before,
point it to the chat.
Okay. So as I said before, we, in the European Monetary Union, which means among the countries who share the common currency, the euro, there is one currency, as I said, and 19 national fiscal policies. So these are the countries who, hold on, okay, like this. These are the countries who are sharing the euro in the European Union. We have 19 countries, so you can see there are big countries like Germany, France, Italy, but also very small countries like Greece, but also Malta, Cyprus, Luxembourg. These are tiny, small, little countries in the European Union. Then you have other countries who are not in the Eurozone, but would like to join the Eurozone. In my class, we have seen all the criteria that you have to respect in order to join the Eurozone and then to share the European common currency, but unfortunately we don't have time to go through this. And then there are two countries who belong to the European Union but do not want to have the euro. And these two countries are Denmark and the UK. So the sum of all these countries is 28, as Elena has shown us. So among these 28 countries, only 19 share the euro. So these 19 countries, they form what is called the European Monetary Union. So as I said, these 19 countries, they have their own budget. They can take their own decisions in terms of fiscal policies. But why it's important to have rules? Why do we need fiscal rules? Let me give you a very, very simple example. When I joined the finance ministry, at that time the minister was Mr. Ciampi, who then became a very popular and well-known president of the Italian Republic. And he is actually still alive. He used to be, at the time, very old in a way. So he, in a sense, he remembered very well the war. And so for him, he would always say, it's very important that we understand that the euro is a project of peace. We need peace, but we need also rules in order to implement peace, and we need rules. And everybody should respect those rules, because we are like in a big building. All the countries have an apartment, and if you, for example, you throw parties every night, people on the other apartments will not be able to sleep. So we need to have certain rules, and all the owners of the apartments have to respect those rules. So in a way, fiscal rules have been introduced in order to not only respect your neighbors, but also to strengthen the power and the political power and economical power of the European Monetary Union. Okay, so which are these fiscal rules? This is very simplified, because I can tell you that the fiscal rules are very complex. But in 1992, it has been signed a treaty in the city of Maastricht in the Netherlands. And in that occasion, two very important fiscal rules have been introduced in Europe. The first rule has to do with the deficit. The deficit is the difference between what a state is spending, so public expenditures for school, hospital, health, defense, everything you need, everything a country would spend, and then minus taxation, so all the revenues that a government receives from the taxpayers, from the citizens. So the first rule is that this deficit, in terms of GDP is the wealth which is produced by a country, has to be lower than 3%. This is a threshold that has been decided, and it's a threshold that has been also very much criticized, because people would say, why 3% and not 4, not 2? But actually there was a reason at that time, because, and here I come to to the second fiscal rule, which is the rule on the debt. The debt is the sum of all the deficit. So in a way, the deficit is a flow, the debt is a stock. Mm-hmm. So if you want to measure your debt from 0 to, I don't know, in the last 20 years, you sum all the deficit. This is very simplified, but I want you to understand the concept. the debt would be the sum of the last 20 deficit. So obviously the more you spend, the higher will be your deficit, and then the higher will be your debt if you don't have enough revenues to finance your expenditures. Okay? So, the rule on the debt is that this debt, in terms of GDP, so in terms of the wealth that you produce, has to be lower than 60%. So again, why 60%? Why not 80? Why not 20? This is because when those two rules, these two big important rules, were introduced in 1992, the average debt of the area, of the euro area, was around 80% of GDP. So the idea was that if you have a deficit which is lower than 3% and a certain growth rate of your GDP, then slowly you can reduce your debt. So these two rules, in a way, can guarantee a certain sustainability of your public finances, and this is very important for a country who belongs to the Union. Then what we have seen is that these two very simple rules were not sufficient. Lots of countries were not respecting those rules. Just to give you an example, Italy has always had, and actually still has, a debt which is much higher than 60% of its GDP. Actually, is 133% of the GDP. And not only lots of countries were not respecting those rules, but were not having sanctions. So nobody was punishing countries who were not respecting the rules. It's like if you, again, you are in your condo, you are having parties every night, and you are not respecting the rules, you're not switching off the music, I don't know, at 2 o'clock at night, and actually you're not even paying a fine. So in 2011, which is in the middle of the crisis, lots of countries, especially the countries who were respecting the rules, like Germany, Austria, Finland, made lots of pressure in order to introduce new rules, more stringent rules, more severe rules. So now, starting from 2011, there has been a big reform of the fiscal rules in Europe, and now there are even more rules. It's even more complicated, and again, I cannot go into that. The students of my class know what I'm talking about. It's very complex, but I just want you to know that there are lots of rules, and in order to respect the rules is very complicated. So the problem is, what happens if you don't respect those rules? What happens if you have a very high debt, or if you have a very high deficit, which means that you spend much more than what you earn? So you need to ask money to your neighbors. So what will happen? So if one country does not respect the fiscal rules, it will eventually lose access to financial markets, because you can start asking for money, you can ask for money, but then there is a moment where markets, investors would not trust you anymore. They would think, oh well, your debt is too high, what are you doing? You are not managing in a proper way your public finances, so we will not trust you anymore, we will not give you more money. So there is a risk of default. So a country might find itself in a position of not be able to give back the money which he has borrowed. And the third problem is the risk of contagion. So if one country in the European Monetary Union has problems, that might create a contagion. So there is going to be another country who might find itself in a position of a possible future default. And this is exactly what has happened in the European crisis. The crisis has started with Greece, but then has been a contagion, and other European countries, let's say the weakest countries from a financial point of view, have had deep problems, starting with their public finances, but also with the banking sector and the private sector and so on. So let me show you the 5 countries who have had major fiscal problems. So as I said, Greece, and we will concentrate on the Greek case in 2 minutes, has been the first country with financial problems, has been the first country who had to ask to the other countries for help. So, and he has had actually 3 big financial financial aid package. The second country has been Ireland in 2010. The third country, Portugal, a year later Ireland, then Spain because of its banking sector, and actually Spain has received financial aid only for the banking sector. And the last country is Cyprus. As I said, Cyprus is a small island in front of Greece, a very small island, like I think less than 2 million of people live there. But still, Cyprus share the common currency, so it has to be saved in a way, because it can create problems to the union as a whole. Okay, so let's concentrate on the Greek case. Okay. So the crisis, as I explained to my student, actually started in the United States with the collapse of the Lehman Brothers in 2007, and then slowly, actually not so slowly, but it arrived in the European Union through the banking sector. And since Greece had a very high debt, and this debt was in the European banks, that created the, I'm simplifying in a way, that created the crisis in Europe. But the moment where we can say, oh, this is really the start of the European crisis, is when this man here, this is the Greek, former Greek Prime Minister, George Papandreou. He went on television. He's a socialist, a very powerful man. Actually, it's like a monarchy. His father used to be prime minister. His grandfather used to belong to the you know that, okay? to the army. So it's a republic in Greece, but there are 2 big families that sort of share the power. So Mr. Papandreou went on television and he said, well, we are very sorry. I have to tell you that up to now we have cheated. We have said to you in terms of, in the sense you as our neighbors, as our as member of the union, that our deficit was below 3%. That's why we could join the European Monetary Union. Actually, that was a big lie. That's not true at all. Our deficit is much higher. It's around 15% of our GDP. So I remember when that happened, I was living in Germany, in Frankfurt, and imagine the reaction of the Germans. It was like, what? You're cheating? Are you crazy? I mean, I'm not going to share the currency with a country who is cheating. And this was a big scandal in Germany, not only because in Germany you don't cheat and you don't lie, and this has to do with the culture, with the mentality, but also because the value of a currency is just the trust. If I say you that this is €1 and it's worth €1, it's because we believe it's true. So trust is a crucial element in order to share a currency. So if I don't trust you anymore because you cheat, and you have been cheating for years and years, how can I share? How can we have the same currency? So the reaction, I can assure you, in Germany was really big shock, big shock. What are we going to do now? And also because people were not expecting this. So it was a surprise and a shock, and also they didn't know what are we going to do now. Okay, but let's first, we will see the reaction of the other European countries later, but I would like to explain you why Greece has cheated and why the Greek deficit was so high. So how was the macroeconomic framework in Greece? Okay, this is not on there. Okay, so why the crisis in Greece? Okay, bribery, corruption, weak institutions. As I said before, there was a sort of a monarchy. So once you would have the Papandreou family, and then after 10 years you would have another family, which is Karamanlis. So that obviously creates a monopoly of the power and gives rise to easy corruption, let's put it this way. Very inefficient public administration. Just to give you an example, some numbers so you have an idea. Between 2003 and 2009, 1 million civil servants out of 10 million people who live in Greece were hired in the public sector. Can you imagine? It's like 10% of the people who were working in the public administration. That means that you have to pay for them. And if you pay for them, either you raise taxes, or you ask money, or you raise the debt. So you have two ways to pay public salaries, taxes or debt. And actually the Greek government at the time, in order to buy consensus, in order to be popular, instead of raising taxes, which is, very unpopular, people don't like that, he would increase the deficit and the debt. So the result was that after 10 years, the deficit was around 15% and the debt very, very high. Increase in public expenditures. In only 1 year, there was an increase of more than 10 percentage points, which is really a lot. Really a lot, and also that shows how inefficient was the public administration, because if you increase so much public expenditures, it also shows that you are not using public money in an efficient way, in a proper way, in a way. So you're just sort of using the money in order to buy consensus and in order to sort of finance, in a way, corruption. Tax evasion is another good indicator. Tax evasion in the period of end of 1999 to 2007 was more than 30% of GDP. That means that 1/3 of the taxpayers were not paying taxes. So again, you have lots of expenditures, you need money to finance these expenditures. 1/3 of the population is not paying taxes. The political power doesn't want to raise taxes because it's very unpopular, so they were increasing the debt again and again and again. So there is a point where if you keep on asking money to financial markets, then the markets will tell you, oh, wait a second, this is too much. I mean, you are asking too much money, we will not lend you more because we don't trust you anymore. And this is why the crisis started. Another important indicator is the current account deficit. The current account is the difference between what you export and what you import. So what you export is what you produce in your country and you sell it abroad. For example, in Greece you would sell the yogurt, but not only that obviously, but yogurt and many other leather products. And the imports is what you buy from abroad. And actually Greece buys lots of products, especially raw materials. So the current account in the period 2005 and 2009 was more than 15% of GDP. That shows that the country was importing much more than what it was exporting. So again, how do you pay your imports? You pay your imports through the debt. So this gives you an idea of how was the Greek situation before the crisis. I have some graphs for you. Okay, as you can see, real GDP per capita measures the wealth of each person in a very simple way. So you see that before the crisis, let's say 2009, it's the year of the crisis, the real GDP per capita in Greece was increasing. So people were very rich in a way. But why they were rich? Because they were borrowing money. So it was an unsustainable growth. So it's easy to be rich with someone else's money, in a way. Okay. So then you see that after the crisis it went down. And if you compare with Italy and the Eurozone, you see that before the crisis, before 2009, actually Greek people were richer in per capita terms than in Italy and than in comparison with the Eurozone average. So that shows that Greece was increasing, but in a very unsustainable way. So there is a moment where the bubble, in a certain sense, explodes. Okay, another good indicator, just to show you. Nominal compensation per employee. So this is salary. Again, if you compare with the euro area, you see how higher was in comparison with the other Eurozone countries. Again, because there were lots of people employed in the public sector, and the salaries were very, very high. This, again, it's in a way, it's a political tool. Politicians were using high salaries in order to buy consensus. This is something that happens not only in Greece, let me tell you, it happens everywhere. Then the public debt. You see, during the blue line is Greece, how the dynamic, it has always been higher than the Eurozone average. Let me remind you that in the Eurozone average, you also have countries who are with a very low debt. So that's why the average can be not so high. So you have countries like Luxembourg, Austria, Finland, and those countries have a very, very low debt. So the Euro average is an average of very high debt countries and very low debt countries. But still, what is important from this graph is that the Greek debt was always increasing. And that shows that Greece was consuming, importing, spending without having enough money, without having enough revenues, but using money from the financial markets. So, in 2009, the situation was unsustainable. As I said before, the Greek Prime Minister went on television and said, "We are really sorry, we need help. We need help. Our deficit is too high, we don't know what to do. So we need your help because there is the risk of default. And if we default, it's going to be a problem for the whole euro area." Again, it's like if you are in a big building and if there is a fire in one apartment, it's not only the problem of this apartment, it's also the problem of the other's apartment. So you need the cooperation of the others. That's why it's very sort of tricky, the European Monetary Union, because you are sharing a currency, but you are not in a political union, so there is no one person who can take the decision, there's no Mr. Obama who can decide, but at the same time, the others have to help you, because if they don't help you, then they might get hurt. So that's the complex organization, and I think Elena has explained it very well before. Okay, reaction of the European community. As I said, in Germany the reaction was really, really bad. People were shocked, people were like, "We are not going to help you, it's your problem, you can save yourself, we don't want to help you, but also we don't know how to help you. We don't have the instruments to help you." Because this is something completely new for us. In the treaty, it's never written in case of default. In the treaties, in the European treaties, the Maastricht Treaty and all the other treaties that Elena has presented before, the word default doesn't exist. Because the idea was that we are together, we share the currency, but we behave well. We don't default. So the German reaction, and let's say the reaction of the northern countries was, we are not going to help you. You retire at 50 years old, we retire at 67, we work a lot, you don't work, we are efficient, you are lazy, we're not going to help you. We're not going to ask our taxpayers to put the money on your country. But then, obviously, things changed because the situation in Greece was getting worse and worse. The financial market started to be really, really nervous. So the spread, I don't know if you're familiar with this indicator, the spread, let's say it's a good indicator of how I trust you in a way. So the spread started to increase also in other countries, like in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal, in Ireland. So really the situation was very, very complex and dangerous in a way. So in March 2010, so let's say 6 months after the Prime Minister Papandreou went on television, the European leaders said, okay, now we need a solution. We need to find a solution, let's get together, let's analyze a possible way of intervention. And they start thinking of what should we do? Should we create new instruments? Should we do some bilateral loans? Should we ask for someone else's help? And for example, Germany, and in particular the Chancellor Merkel, she said, okay, we're going to help Greece, but I want the intervention, the help of the International Monetary Fund. The International Monetary Fund is an international institution based in Washington, D.C. There are like more than 180 members. United States are the first shareholders. The second shareholder is China, but you also have among the shareholders African countries and developing countries. Italy obviously is one of the big shareholders. But why Germany wanted to have the participation of the IMF? Because Merkel said, you know what, we don't have the experience, we don't know what to do, we don't have the know-how, so I want the IMF to participate because this is what they do. The IMF, I mean the mission of the IMF is exactly this. There is a problem in Africa, there is a problem in Colombia, there is a problem in Argentina. We go there, we give them money, we tell them what to do, and we check if they respecting the program. Otherwise, we don't give them the monthly amount of money. That was a big request from Germany because it started to be not a European problem, but an international problem. Because if you ask for the help of the IMF, it means that you are introducing in the decision-making process, as Elena was saying before, we know how difficult it is, the European decision-making process. But with the help of the IMF, it means that Americans can say something. Chinese can say something because they're using their money in order to help Greece. So this to let you understand how difficult was the process of finding a solution for Greece. But at the end, the decision was taken. The IMF would participate for 30% of the aid financial package. So the first program. Okay. In May 2010, the European head of states and government, so at the time you had Mr. Sarkozy, who was president of France, Berlusconi, who was the prime minister in Italy, then you had Zapatero in Spain, in UK you had who was in UK? Not Cameron.
In 2010?
Yes.
Not Cameron.
Not Cameron.
Who was before Cameron in the UK?
We don't know. We'll check that.
We'll find out.
We'll find that.
We'll Google.
We'll find that. So all these people decided, okay, we're going to help Greece, and we will give 110 billion euro to Greece, which is a lot. It's really a lot of bilateral loans, which means that Italy will sort of sign a bilateral agreement with Greece, then UK bilateral agreement, Germany and France, and the IMF will give 30 billion euro in terms of financial aid. In exchange of that, of this big financial aid, the Greek government accepted to sign what is called a Memorandum of Understanding, which is a contract where you say, okay, I accept your money, but in exchange I will do the reforms and I will reduce my deficit and my debt. So I will implement a fiscal consolidation. Reforms means reforming the public administration, trying to make the economy more efficient, so liberalization, privatization, selling some public buildings in order to get money and reduce the debt, so all those things that you do normally in a country in order to have a sustainable growth. Okay, then you have a group of people which is called, I don't know if you ever, okay, have you ever heard this name, Troika? So this is a group of 3 institutions, IMF, a delegation from the IMF, a delegation from the European Commission. As Elena said before, the European Commission is like the government of the European Union. And then the delegation of the ECB, which is the European Central Bank. The European Central Bank is like the Federal Reserve in the United States, is the European institution which manages the euro. So it's an institution which prints the euro. So before joining the euro, you have your national central bank who prints your money. If you join the euro, then it's in Frankfurt, you have the European Central Bank, and is the institution in charge of printing the euro. So these 3 delegations would go every 2-3 months in Greece, and they will check whether the government is respecting the Memorandum of Understanding. I have a friend who actually belonged to this Troika because he works for the European Commission, and he was telling me that it's not an easy task. It's not an easy task to arrive in a country and sort of make pressure to the political leaders and also all the other political actors to implement the reforms, because as I said before, reforms can be very costly in terms of from a political point of view. So if you want to have a more efficient public administration, it means that at a certain point you have to fire some people. So that shows you how costly it can be from a political point of view. So the Troika would go there every 3 months and see if the government is doing exactly what they have agreed to do. So, after less than 2 years, unfortunately, another program is necessary in Greece, and this is the only country where another program was needed. In the other 4 countries that I showed you before, Spain, Portugal, Ireland, Cyprus is still under the program, so let's take it away. But Spain, Portugal, and Ireland, one program was sufficient. So they signed for their Memorandum of Understanding, they got the money, they did the reform, and after 3-4 years, they were able to, they actually are giving back the money to the IMF and to the other European countries. This is not what is happening in Greece. In Greece, not only they were not able to respect the first Memorandum of Understanding, but they also asked for another program, for a second program. And actually, not even that has been sufficient. In July, they just signed a third bailout program. In that case, the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, said, okay, this time we will not participate. Why? Because, as I said before, the shareholders in the IMF are the US, and then the Chinese, and then the African countries, and they are tired with Greece. They said, we don't want to give you more money. We think you're not respecting the memorandum of understanding. So this time we won't give you more. We want to see if you do the reforms. Maybe in November, which means in 10 days, in 20 days, we might give you more money. But at this stage, we just want to see the developments. There is an informal reason for that, is because the director of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, the French director, she wants to be re-elected for a second term, and so she doesn't want to appear too European. So she needs the vote of the African countries and the Latin American countries. So it's always a question of politics. But okay, so Greece is still under a bailout program. The crisis is still ongoing, and the country is still in trouble. So, and here I go to my third point. So what went wrong? Why Greece needed 3 bailout programs, whereas other countries only one program was enough? So the question is, maybe the memorandum of understanding, the Greek program, was too severe, too much austerity. Well, it's true that Greece was the first case, and as I said before, it's very difficult to find solutions, and especially good solutions, in a situation of emergency. It's very complicated because, again, Elena said before, it's also a question of democracy. If in Italy, for example, in order to allow the Italian government to give money to Greece, you need the Italian parliament to vote for this. So you need to have consensus. So you need to explain to the population in the other 18 countries why it's important to help Greece. And it's not an easy task, I can tell you. Again, I was living in Germany. It's very complicated to convince the German public opinion that it is necessary to take one part of the taxes, and instead of using these taxes for hospitals in Germany or for schools, you have to take this money and to give it to the Greek, who again retire when they are 50 years old. So there is a very big problem of democracy. So that's why at the very beginning, the first financial program to Greece was, and this I have to be honest, was very, very severe. So the conditions were very strict. But it's true that there are also national responsibilities. Okay. In the sense that there were lots of inefficiency. In the last 4 years, there have been 4 elections, 4 political elections, 4 different governments, and every time you have an election, you lose time, you lose also money, you promise the moon and then you have to come back. So it's a very complicated process. So, as I said, one responsibility is not only inefficiency but also political weakness. So now there is this young prime minister, I don't know if you ever heard of Alexis Tsipras. He's very young, he's 40, he's very popular, but in his electoral campaign he has really promised the moon, in the sense he has said, I will do whatever is necessary, but then it's very complicated to maintain these promises once you are the prime minister. So, this is the reaction of Tsipras. He said, you know what, maybe we are inefficient, maybe we are slow, maybe we are not doing exactly what we are supposed to do, but the problem is that there are too many rules. There are too many fiscal rules, we are unable to respect all those rules, and you're asking us too much austerity. Austerity means that you're asking us to reduce our debt and to reduce our deficit, and it's too much for us. We cannot do this in a fast way. We need time. We need a gradual adjustment. This is what Tsipras is asking to the European leaders. So he's asking for more money, but he's asking also for more time. But what can we learn from the Greek case is that this is the reaction, it is important, the reaction of the German government and also of northern countries. Wolfgang Schäuble is the German finance minister. He's very popular in his country. He's a very strict person. He's in a wheelchair because he has been shot by a terrorist when he was 30 years old. So he's a very respected man, but he thinks rules have to be respected. So the answer to the Greek government is, okay, you want our help, we are ready to help you, but you have to respect the rules. Otherwise, it's very difficult to restore trust. So again, this word trust is very important because you always have to remember that we all share a currency, and the value of a currency has to do with trust. So you Greek, this is the message from Germany, we are ready to help you, we will convince our parliament to give you a third financial aid, a third package, but we want you to show us that you are ready to change, that you are ready to do the reforms, even though the reforms can be very costly from a political point of view, but also from a social point of view. And this is interesting that Germany is saying that, because Germany in 2005 implemented very strong reforms. So also Germany was in a very difficult situation from an economical point of view, but they have implemented strong reforms, and it has been very costly for the government at that time. The chancellor was Schröder, and actually he lost the elections because of the reforms. So now Germany is saying to Greece, I know it's hard. I know it's hard implementing reforms. I know you might lose consensus, but it's the only way to build a strong economy and have in the future a sustainable growth. And it's important for you, but especially important for us, because we want a strong euro area. If in the euro area there is one country, even if it's a small country, who is not strong enough, who is weak, it's like, again, it's like the apartment. If there is one apartment burning, I won't feel safe, even though I have a big terrace and a big apartment on the top floor. So this is, again, the trick of sharing a currency but not being part of a political union. So, and I go to my last point. So the lesson from the Greek case. Well, the first lesson is that when you have lots of rules and you ask austerity, which means you're asking sacrifices, that might lead to populism. And Elena also sort of talked about that. And I'll show you a picture. This is how Angela Merkel was depicted when she first arrived in Greece. So you see, she has the mustache of Hitler, and she has a jacket like a Nazi. And this also was a big shock for Germany. Having been in Germany for 7 years, I can tell you that they are very, their past is something which is in their present. So they feel, Angela Merkel, when she first went to the Knesset, to the parliament in Israel, she said, actually she spoke in German, which was the first time they accepted in Israel a German leader to speak the language of the Nazis. And she said, we are responsible forever. So we are we feel the responsibility, and we know what our past means, but this is unacceptable. Those things are unacceptable in Europe. Europe, again, it's a project of peace. It's a project of being together, of sharing a currency. So we don't accept that. So, but this is the result of maybe too many rules, too much austerity. So the rise of populism, not only in Greece, but also in Italy. In Italy you have this comedian, 5-star movements. In France, you have Le Front National with Marine Le Pen, and actually it's a very popular party. In the UK, we have seen in the video before Farage, and this has to do not only with helping other countries, but also with the immigration problem. So when you ask too much in the European Union, when you introduce too many rules, then the consequence might be the rise of populism, because people feel we don't feel represented in this Europe. We don't feel the democratic link. So, my last 2 slides. So what could be the consequences? The consequences might be even the disruption of the euro, because all these populist parties, one of the objectives of this European populist party is get rid of the euro. We don't want this euro anymore, because once we have the euro, we have to respect all those rules, and we don't want those rules because they're too much for us. We want to have our national sovereignty. And imagine if a country would leave the euro. If one country would leave the euro, first, again, it's not written anywhere. In the treaty, it's not considered as an option. But then the markets, the financial market would say, oh, well, so the euro, it's not a irrevocable project, so you can exit. So who will be the next one? So if Greece is leaving, maybe in a year or two, maybe Italy will also leave, because Italy has the second high debt among the European countries. So this has a very negative impact also on the European growth. Would you invest in a country who might leave the euro? Not really, because why would you invest in a country who might change the currency in a year? You won't do that. So which is the solution? And this is my last slide. The solution to me is more Europe. We need to go on. We need to go on with integration. We need to strengthen the role of the European institutions. Elena has shown us that we have the Commission, we have the European Council, and we have the European Parliament. And really the European Parliament represents us. 500 million of European citizens, more than in the United States. So what we might do is to strengthen the role of the European Parliament. We should go on and create a real fiscal union, because as I said, now we have 19 different fiscal policies. In the future, we might create a single fiscal policy, European fiscal policy, with, for example, the Eurobonds. So instead of having Italian national bonds, French bonds, German bonds, then we would have a Eurobond. And the third step, which is the last step, we should move towards a real political union, which means one president elected by these 500 million citizens who has the power to take decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We are now moving to our next speaker, who's Alexandra Ricard-Guay. Alexandra holds a PhD in social work from McGill University and a master's in political science and international relations. She has worked and conducted research in the field of trafficking for more than 5 years. Her areas of research are human trafficking, irregular migration, gender and migration, and gender-based violence. Dr. Ricard is a research associate at the European University Institute, in particular at the Robert Schuman Center for Advanced Studies, which is a very important center in the European University Institute. She's currently the main researcher for the study on demand side of trafficking in persons in the domestic work sector, which is conducted in 7 European countries. The study is part of a larger European Commission funded project. Prior to joining the European University Institute in September 2014, Dr. Ricard-Guay was a coordinator and co-founder of the Quebec Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and she also conducted a national study on access to services for victims of trafficking in Canada. So thank you for having accepted our invitation, Dr. Ricard-Guay. Please come to the stage.
Put it down.
Is it PowerPoint?
Mm-hmm. So, hi everyone. First of all, thanks for the invitation. I'm very pleased to be here today. And it's never easy to be the last one after 3 hours of very nice discussions. So, this presentation is going to be quite different in terms of the topic that I'm going to address, as well much less specific to one country. So I'm going to address the EU response to human trafficking. I'm just going to test this.
Oh, would you like me to do it for you so you don't have to turn around all the time?
Thanks. So, in order to present the EU response to trafficking, I thought about articulating the presentation as follows. First, I'm going to present a bit what are we talking about? What is the international definition, but also the international framework? Because actually the European Union response has been built and is embedded within this international framework. Then moving on, I'm going to present a bit what is trafficking in Europe and what is the approach in the European Union with regard to combating trafficking. So this is a very hot topic. It's high on the political agenda of many countries, international community, international organization, as well as the European Union. Mm-hmm. So it's widespread in the media, in public discussion. I'm sure you've all heard stories. And many terms are often used to refer to the same or different phenomena. So whether we talk about slavery, slavery-like practices, forced labor, trafficking, smuggling of migrants. So there is a lot of confusion in the public debate. So I'm going to start with the basics and then move on to the European context. So now we are in a very important moment. It's been 15 years that the main international instrument and legal definition has been adopted. So a lot of development has been going on, a lot of mobilization of efforts, creation, setting up of international organizations which mandate is specific to trafficking, and in the case of Europe, a lot of advancements as well in terms of legal and policy framework. So, is it old or new phenomenon? It's quite an old phenomenon, but the way we frame it now has historical roots, which we often tend to forget. And the one that I'm going to mention with regard to the international framework also applies to the European Union. So actually we can trace back to the early 20th century when there was really an international wave of concern regarding trafficking. At that time we were referring to it as the white sex trade. So basically it was conflated with forced prostitution and sexual exploitation and exclusively looking at women and then children. Mm-hmm. So this led to different international instruments, but we still see the emphasis today on sexual exploitation. Then, after a few decades of silence, it came back on the international agenda during the 70s, but mostly during the 90s. And if we look in Europe, it's not exclusive to Europe, but then the strong link was really with irregular migration. So we had two driving factors. One was related to forced prostitution and sexual exploitation coming from mostly civil society, feminist movements, which is quite divided on the topic. And then in the 90s came this concern regarding irregular migration. Among those smuggled migrants, we may find human trafficking victims. And then in 2000, there was this big compromise of the Palermo Protocol. For the first time, we had international agreed upon definition. So in contrast to what had been done before, it was not only focusing on sexual exploitation. The definition includes now multiple forms of exploitation. labor exploitation, forced labor, slavery and slavery-like practices, and even removal of organs. So now we saw a broadened definition and also a very strong framework at the international level. In terms of definition, what I would like you to remember, let's say, because we could discuss on definition for hours. If you have questions afterward, you're more than welcome to ask them. So in terms of legal perspective, the definition that has been established by the Palermo Protocol and then later on transposed into the EU legal framework, it's a tripartite definition. So there are three main components. First, the act. So receiving, harboring, recruiting. Then the means, how the person intends and does exploit the victim. So in terms of means, you have, of course, physical violence, the threat or the use of force, but also less explicit modes, means of coercion, as fraud, deception, and many others. Also abuse of power, position of authority, and position of vulnerability. And then the key element is exploitation. So the purpose, the intention of exploiting someone. And as I've mentioned, there are different forms of exploitation. Then, two things to remember as well is that this definition in the Palermo Protocol is part of an international convention on organized crime. So the first time we decided to address it at the international level, it was not a human rights convention. It was a convention on organized crime. So from that perspective, there is a sometimes misconstructed understanding of what is trafficking. Part of it is that we believe that there has to be organized crime. No, traffickers may be individual, families, opportunistic little groups, not necessarily transnational organized crime. The other thing is that now there is a lot of confusion between smuggling and trafficking. And first of all, trafficking there is no requirement to cross a border. It can happen within a country, and the crossing of the border can be legal or illegal. So it's important to remember that it's different. And especially now with the migration and refugee crisis in Europe, we hear a lot about smuggling and trafficking in the same sentence. Smuggling is the facilitation of crossing of border illegally, but the transaction ends at the destination country. In the case of trafficking, the consent might be there at the beginning or not, and then the exploitation continues. It's an ongoing process. So the approach, that I will come back to it in the European context of the Palermo Protocol, is three main P's, and then a fourth one was added: prevention, prosecution, and protection. And then the partnership. Some of the main critics that we hear is that most of energies and efforts have been centered on prosecution, so the law enforcement part, criminalization of trafficking, and much less on protection than prevention. Of course, there are a lot of programs on that. Then in terms of the scopes and the facts, I've put that because one of the main questions is how many victims are we talking about, whether internationally or in Europe. Numbers are very difficult to access. So the assessment of the scope of trafficking is really challenging. It is underreported for many reasons. I won't go into it, but so of course it is a criminalized and underground phenomenon. So often the iceberg image is used as in order to say we only see one bit of the problem. But at the same time, we face various sources of estimates that range from 20 million victims of forced labor, including trafficking. Now the International Labour Organization don't make the distinction in the data that they provide. Another one, the Global Slavery Index, provides an estimate of 35 million. So what is the methodology? How did they arrive to those estimates? And then when we look at registered victims, like I'm going to show you in Europe, we fall down to a couple of thousands of victims, of course, not millions. It doesn't say that they don't exist, it's just that they are not properly identified by the authorities. So in Europe, since 2013, Eurostat, which is an agency that provides statistics at the European level, is now providing estimates for trafficking in Europe. So quite interestingly, those are the registered victims to the authorities in each of the countries, the 28 member states. They also have estimates for other countries. So in each of the countries, it's not equal, it's not standard. We're still in a phase of developing systematic collecting of data, which is for the moment not the case. Definitions sometimes are not applied in the same way. So we're talking about 30,000 victims, of which, quite interestingly, 65% were EU citizens. So when I was referring to misconstruction of what is trafficking, oftentimes seen as being a woman from Eastern countries brought in Europe and even other countries from Asia against her will, and it's not perceived as being a European problem per se. So 65, and also 70% of the people who have been prosecuted were EU citizens. And then, of course, we see that sexual exploitation is still the number 1 form of exploitation, but there is an increase in the number of cases of trafficking for labor exploitation. So we're talking about 19% now. And of course, we see the strong gender dimension still in regard to what is happening. So I've put the key countries. So we have an ideal, so Romania, Bulgaria, Netherlands, Hungary, and Poland in terms of the EU countries. And then I just wanted to show how few prosecutions we still have. Still, it's encouraging, but compared to the millions that we had in the first slides in terms of estimates, it's quite different. So far, in the European Union, as well as in national level and international framework, the emphasis has been on sexual exploitation. That's why I decided to put a bit more information on labor exploitation, because that's where it's the hardest for the moment to identify. How do we, in practice, identify a victim of labor exploitation? And now the main sectors in Europe, I mean, we can think of agriculture, of course, that we can hear some stories from agriculture, but also textile, any sectors actually we might think of, but the most vulnerable are those where you have high number of irregular migrants and oftentimes informal working arrangements. So those, of course, set the conditions to more vulnerability to exploitation. So these are some indicators, but we can come back later in terms of how can we know if a person is in a situation of trafficking or not. But what is important is that the threshold when a situation of exploitative practices become trafficking is not uniform across the European Union, despite all the efforts in order to have a strong definition. So in European Union, as I said, it came back on the agenda mid-90s. And from then until today, we can see a real expansion and consolidation of the EU framework. Actually, now it's one of the most comprehensive framework. In terms of legal instruments, I think that the EU have reached a very complete picture. So it started in '97 as well on an instrument that was focusing only on sexual exploitation and was not binding. So there were no obligations for states. Then they move on to the framework decision in 2002. This time, some reference were done to other forms of exploitation, but still no mention of prevention. It was focused on law enforcement, the criminal aspect, and very strongly still influenced by the fight against irregular migration. Also, just to remember that at another level, the human trafficking is prohibited by fundamental rights and the European Convention on Human Rights. So those are also avenues in order to fight. Quite interestingly, actually, the European Convention of Human Rights did not mention trafficking. It's in one decision of the European Court that they have established that trafficking falls under the Article 4 on slavery and forced labor. But what I want to bring your attention to is the directive of 2011. This is the milestone of EU response right now. It is, as I said, quite comprehensive and it is binding. So countries, the European Union member states had until April 2013 to ensure the transposition of the directive into national legislation, which has not been done in all of the countries. So now in 2015, there will be a new report assessing on the level of transposition of the directive. So it's quite interesting to see that, so this piece of the legal framework has really embraced the 4 Ps. So there are provision regarding prevention, strong provision also regarding protection, and also continuing on prosecution, and partnership, which has a lot of relevance when we think of Europe. So it did transpose the Palermo Protocol into the definition, and now they have even included other forms of trafficking, begging, which is an issue of concern in Europe. So we may think of Roma, unaccompanied minors who may be coerced to do begging. Also, other forms of criminal activities, and this is an important element because in this directive, before going to the preventive measure, there is the last one, which is quite important. Now, victims of trafficking may not be penalized and criminalized for criminal activities that they have been compelled to do under the trafficking situation. This is a big advancement in terms of protection of the rights of the victims of trafficking. Also, the directive is quite important because of the protection of the reflection period. So now, countries must provide a reflection period of 30 days, which is not conditional to the cooperation with law enforcement. This is a big step. It's different from other countries, other part of the world. So this means that the person who is registered, identified as a victim, has the right to have 30 days of reflection, thinking if they will continue or not with the investigation or go back to their country. And within that period, they have access to assistance and support as well. Also, one key element in action against trafficking is identification of victims. So within that framework, the directive foresees early mechanism to early identification. So they've asked European countries to put in place referral mechanism, and also some mechanism that will enable identification of victim and their referral to the specific organization that may provide services to them. And in terms of preventive measure, one now we see as a strategic point of action is addressing demand. So beyond looking at the vulnerability of the migrants or other groups in the population to trafficking, we need to address the demand side. So what are the incentives? Where comes from the demand? And within that framework, which is the one I'm working on right now, then you can see the partnership and working with the businesses. Also with consumers, raising awareness. What are the kind of products that you're buying? Is it a result of trafficked people work, labor? So all of those actions are now foreseen in the directive. And also, of course, promote training. That's the best way to raise awareness and facilitate the identification of victims. I could go on many slides in order to present you all the tools and instruments that have been established in the European Union. Because as you've mentioned for another topic, trafficking may be addressed from different points. So it may be addressed as a question of irregular migration, gender-based violence, also as I included employer sanction directive. Because this shows also that you can address it by sanctioning employers who hire irregular migrants and use this position of vulnerability to exploit them. And another piece that was important in 2004, so before the directive, was the one on the residence permit. So this was a strong advancement in the protection of victims, allowing to give resident permits to victims, but this was conditional to cooperation with law enforcement. So if we see the perspective from a person who is, in many situations, in an irregular migration situation, but not necessarily, just to be reluctant to disclose the information being afraid of appraisal from the traffickers. So of course, this conditionality in reality made it a big challenge to protect the victims. So with the directive, at least there is the 30-day reflection. In terms of how to implement that at the national levels, this is the big challenge. The big challenge is how countries are going to integrate it in their national legislations, and it's not equal in all of the countries. And actually, some of the countries have done amendments and reforms of their penal code very recently. So we don't have the tools to assess how is it going to be implemented. And still, even though all legislations now have included labor exploitation, because in many countries in Europe, it was only sexual exploitation in the penal code. Some of them had forced labor provision. Others, like in France and Belgium, had as a provision conditions contrary to human dignity, but nothing specifically on trafficking for labor exploitation. So despite the fact that now this piece has been integrated, in reality, few cases are identified by law enforcement, because there is a need also to change to evolve in terms of the understanding of what is trafficking, and also to implement tools in order to inspect labor sectors where you may find victims of trafficking. So now there is a lot of research and guidelines being developed for labor inspectors, because they are seen as a key element in implementing the fight against trafficking. And in order to implement the directive, there is now the EU strategy, which will end soon. And many other elements. So they have established in the European Union an anti-trafficking coordinator who is in charge of making sure that the strategy is being implemented, but also ensure the coherence in terms of between the EU agencies, but also with regard to the external relationship with the third country. Because when I've mentioned the 4th P, partnership, in Europe, you may think of partnership, of course, among member states, among the EU agencies, but also with the third countries. And actually, trafficking is part of any bilateral discussions with third country when we discuss migration and mobility. Migration is part of security concerns, is part of fight against different organized crime. So the peace, the partnership is also cooperation among law enforcement agencies, and finally also with civil society. They are the key. They are the one in terms of practitioners, frontline practitioners, in order to be able to identify the victims. So at the EU level, there is now a platform for the civil society, and they meet not only virtually but also in person. So there's a lot of things going on, a lot of mobilization. And as I've mentioned, also the national referral mechanism and national rapporteur, which is not in every country, but the main goal is having an independent organ within the government, which not only collect data, but may assess the policy governments. So, in sum, the big challenge ahead is implementing. The response now is comprehensive. It has integrated, it has been beyond the Palermo protocol. And there is a multiplication of measures, funding. The European Commission funds a lot of research and also projects in order to enhance the services and assistance and protection of victims. So all of that, now we are in a phase of, okay, let's start the assessment. How do we assess all the money that has been going to prevention programs, to raising awareness campaigns? What are the best tools? So we are now after a phase of a lot of funding and mobilization, and to see what works and what does not work. And there is a lot of critics regarding the fact that despite a strong acknowledgement that trafficking may be in other sectors than sexual exploitation, still there is a lot of misconstruction about what it is in reality, and access to services. So the end point, right, of all this policy, how victims do access services, shelters, protection, legal advice, legal assistance, is still really, really tailored to sexual exploitation. There is basically no shelters for victims of trafficking for labor exploitation, as an example. And also, even if the EU approach has moved beyond the focus on criminal and law enforcement, it is still there. And we have to always be careful so we balance in the approach, because human trafficking brings consensus. Who is in favor? No one. So it's an easy tool at the political level in order to gather political willingness, but then it can be used for other purposes. And this is one of the main critics. So you put the strong consensus of the government in fight of trafficking, but then behind it you have a lot of measures that actually seek to counter irregular migration and may, at the end, impact on the victims of trafficking. Because in Europe, as it has been mentioned by my colleague before, of course, migration policies are very restrictive, and we are even in a situation toward more restrictive policies. So in absence of legal channels for migrants, of course they will engage in risky journey that may lead to trafficking. So one of the challenges that I've put in my other slide is how can we disentangle irregular migration and trafficking, not only in the public perception, but also in the policies. So I think I've touched many of the challenges. And of course, the lack of knowledge. So despite better research than before, we cannot say any longer that trafficking is understudied. It is overwhelmingly studied right now. So we have a lot of research, but still no systematic, in all the countries, systematic collect of data. So from which authorities are we taking the data? How are they identified? Are we doubling the same victims who have been identified by NGO and then by the law enforcement? So this is important in policy terms in order to assess the scope of the problem and to know in which sectors they are, how to tackle it. So this is a big challenge for European Union as well. So that would be it. And of course, if you have any question,
thank you so much. Thank you to both of our speakers, also offering very, very compelling arguments on further issues surrounding the EU. So please, let's open it up for a debate. Yes.
I'm Kelsey, and I was wondering if within Greece, if the economic crisis affected society as a whole fairly equally, or if there was an economic class that was affected more negatively by the crisis.
I'm not sure how I understood the question. Could you rephrase it?
Sorry. I was wondering if the economic crisis affected all kind of social and economic classes equally, or if there was possibly a class that was affected more negatively.
Now that's a very interesting point. No, my answer is no. The crisis has affected mostly the low middle class, and this is because there is a class who is related to the political class, but also to, let's call it, a sort of economical oligarchy, and they own newspapers, TV channels, and especially they own ships. So they are the rich part of the populations, and they haven't been affected in the sense that taxes have been raised mostly on the middle class, low middle class. That's why the new Prime Minister, Alexis Tsipras, is so popular, and he has been elected with a strong majority. And actually, he has been elected twice, because there has been an election in January and another election last September. Because in his program, the first one of the big things that he wants to do is to get rid of all the privileges of these, let's say, class of people who have benefited until now.
Yes.
Tying in like the economy to the immigration we were talking before, how do you think, like I know a lot of the countries have been resistant to letting immigrants in, but as they start to let more in, how do you think they're going to find enough jobs and places to live? Like what do you think the economic effects of that all will be?
Well, the discussion now in Europe, and actually it's a difficult discussion, is on quota. So the idea is to introduce quota so that each country has to accept a certain amount of immigrants, and the amount depends on the GDP, so your wealth, and also on unemployment rate. So there is a logic in the sense that if you have a very high unemployment rate, you would have to accept less immigrants than a country like Germany, who is sort of a full employment. So it makes sense. And this is exactly before, as we have my colleagues in the previous discussion, they said one of the fear of the population is that the immigrants will, in a way, take away jobs to the population. So that's why those quota will have to be related not only to the wealth of a country but also to the amount of vacancies. So you're right, that's a good point. The thing is that even if with those kind of quota it's very difficult to find a consensus because you cannot oblige countries. So at the moment it's on a voluntary basis. So, and as you can imagine, on a voluntary basis, well, it's very difficult to implement such a decision.
Do you have a question? No. Oh, so you have the microphone. I thought you were the microphone just because it's here. Other questions? Yes.
Do you think that the austerity measures in Greece failed because they were just overall unrealistic, or because of the domestic culture in Greece that was used to, like, do you think that it's because people in Greece retired at age 50, or do you think that every single country would have failed under these austerity measures?
I might not be the person to answer this question because I'm working on a book on austerity and I think austerity is a very good thing. But I belong to a very small group actually, not only in Italy but also in Europe. I think in Greece the dose of austerity has been very big. And this is because, as I said in my presentation, it has been the first case. So I think in Germany they were very upset. So they wanted to sort of say, they want to show to the others, well, if you don't respect the rules, this is what will happen to you. Lots of austerity. We will impose you lots of austerity. So, for example, interest rates were very high. The interest rates of the debt were very high in Greece. Then eventually they have been reduced, but at the very beginning interest rates, especially from the IMF, were very high. But I also think there are national responsibilities in the sense that the three governments, one government of technocrats, another government of Samaras and Tsipras, especially in the last 6 months, they have concentrated more on the reform side, on the fiscal consolidation side, instead of the reform side. So they have decided to reduce expenditures and raise taxes instead of implementing reforms. And this is because implementing reforms is more difficult from a political point of view. You need a lot of consensus. Whereas if you increase the VAT, for example, for restaurants and hotels, especially in the islands, it's something that will affect everybody. So from a political point of view, in a way, it's easier. But it's true that if you only do austerity, so more taxes, less expenditures, without the reforms, then the result is an even deeper recession. So you cannot have austerity without reforms, and this, I think, is the responsibility of the national Greek governments. Because if you read the Memorandum of Understanding, the 3 Memorandum of Understanding, you can find that in the internet, the first page is only reforms. So after the first 3 pages, you have fiscal consolidation. So really, what Greece needs is reforms, so a big structural change of the society and of the economical fundamentals.
And Italy does too.
Yes, absolutely. But Italy is doing the reforms.
That's right. Other questions?
This is more of a clarification. I'm not the most experienced in economics, but do you have a couple of examples of specific reforms that would go hand in hand with austerity?
Would go with austerity?
Yeah, that would help austerity work. That you were saying Greece needs to reform, but I'm just
Yeah.
curious as to what those reforms are.
I'll give you 2 examples. The first reform that also Italy would need is the public sector reform. The problem in Greece, but also in Italy, is that the public sector is too big, so that means that it is very costly. So you have too many people who work for the public sector, so it means that every month you have to pay a salary to them. So we have lots of public expenditures, and you need to finance these expenditures. And plus, it's very inefficient. So, for example, you don't need 10% of the population who works for the public administration. So you would need to reform that. And as I said before, it's costly from a political point of view because it means that at a certain point you have to fire people. Cameron, who is the...
Gordon Brown was a minister.
Good. Okay, Gordon Brown. So Cameron, who has been re-elected last year in UK, when he was elected in 2010, he started a big reform. He implemented a big reform of the public administration, and he fired almost 500,000 of civil servants. But he was able, with all these savings in the public sector, to create the room for 4 times more new jobs in the public sectors. Because if you save money, you can invest those monies in more productive areas. So this is one thing. And the other thing that could be done in Greece is liberalization. So Greece is not competitive at all. There are some ranks of the degree of competitiveness, which are published by the World Bank every year. And if you look at the rank, Greece is at one of the lowest among 189 countries. So public administration and liberalization. Liberalization means more competition, lower prices, and more products for the consumers. And this, I think, is also what Italy would need.
Thank you. Other questions?
I just had a quick question. When you were talking about the Eurozone and how it would be difficult if a country leaves because it could have a domino effect is it possible for a country like Greece, if it doesn't improve, do you think it would ever be possible to kick a country out instead of having it leave on its own, or is that like a big no-no?
This is a very interesting question because in the discussion of the 3rd bailout program, it was a very difficult discussion because the European leaders were really fed up, especially because the Prime Minister decided to have a referendum in Greece. And the question was, do you agree with the new condition for a 3rd bailout program, yes or no? And the no won. And it was perceived by the other European, this was in July, and it was perceived by the other European leaders as a no to the euro. So you cannot leave the euro, you can leave the European Union. Okay, this is what is stated in the treaties. You cannot be kicked out. So what do? So in the discussion for the third bailout program, the German finance minister, Mr. Schäuble, wanted to put in the report a sentence which has been eliminated in the final draft, but it stayed there for a while, which was if Greece does not respect the new memorandum, well, the Grexit, so the exit of Greece, might be a solution. So that was the first time it was written really on an institutional piece of paper, the word Grexit. So I think the possibility is still there. My opinion is that it would be a problem for the project in terms of, from a political point of view. In terms of contagion, today the danger, it's not so dangerous as 3 years ago, because now we have instruments. We know what to do. So the contagion would be lower than the one that occurred in 2011 and with the Spanish crisis, the Portuguese crisis and the Irish crisis. But still, from a political point of view, it would be a big problem that a country would leave the euro. Because that would, imagine if Michigan would decide to leave the dollar. It means that there's one country who doesn't trust the money anymore. And again, people who want to invest in the other European countries might think, well, but so it doesn't mean that this is forever. So this is not forever. So I invest, but maybe in a year I have to change currency, and that would cost me a lot. So, you know, that lots of negative consequences.
Any other questions? Yes.
Is there a certain group that tends to be targeted by human traffickers, and what has been the result of the recent influx of immigrants with respect to this issue?
So the more at-risk groups identified are, of course, minors, so children. In terms of vulnerability, women are the ones who are the highest number in terms of victims, and migrants. So those are high-risk groups, which may sometimes or not be reflected in the stats. This is really in terms of vulnerability to exploitation. Then in terms of the sectors, as I've mentioned, of course, sex industry is still number one. Agriculture, you have higher numbers because you have many people working on the farm. But domestic work as well, only that they have fewer numbers because we're talking about individuals working in private home. So that would, and one of the videos that I thought about showing you was a man who was trafficked in construction, which gives another perspective of the testimonies that we are used to hear. So it's not only women, men as well, but there are still a few in the statistics. In terms of the new influx, right now, there are research going on in order to assess, but of course, this is conditions, unfortunately, that may lead to exploitation at various levels of the process. And what I found, this is a personal note, as a researcher on the topic, we've fought so hard to disentangle smuggling and trafficking because that creates two different kinds, right? If you're a victim of trafficking, you access assistance. If you're considered smuggled migrants, you become a criminal. Yeah. The line between the two is very thin, and it has a lot of negative outcomes. But now, with this crisis, again, it's all in the same process, and it becomes very difficult to know when a person will be exploited further on when the person arrives, and the trajectory, the journey. They travel across different countries, so they have a lot of moments in this process in which they can be a victim of exploitation. So no, we don't have data for sure, but a lot of groups are looking into it, and thinking about the sexual violence as well included in this process.
Any other thoughts or questions or comments? Well, before thanking our speakers, I called Beatrice in because Beatrice was actually the organizer of this event. She's the one who did the calls, so put together, a number of things. So you're here. I tricked Beatrice into coming over to thank her. So thank you so much, Beatrice. The students, of course, for your good, interesting questions. And above all, I want to thank our speakers who gave us a wonderful and very intense and interesting perspective on Europe. I think it was great success, and I'm very reassured that we're going to do it again in the winter quarter for our new group. So thank you all, and we're having some lunch now. So thank you again.